Wait, when will the working group?
After these four.
After
These four, then we'll,
perfect, perfect.
okay, so now this is recording. Just figured to mix it up with a little bit of tech talk. And I almost want everyone to introduce each other too, but oh, hey,
Hey,
now
how's
speaking
it
of
going?
which.
Yeah. Or else it's gonna be really hard.
Yeah, anyway.
Was the wrong glass.
You go to the very top right, there's like a tiny thing that says you.
Ah. What do I, standard? Ah. All right.
Yes, so hi, I'm Abby, based in London. I have been hanging around the tag, particularly the platform working group since basically Detroit, a little bit before Detroit. Been a platform engineer for 5 or 6 years and now working on a open source framework that's pre-sandbox. But you know, I on CNCF, so I'm interested in this space. So with the white paper, we did a lot of work on the high level, like goals and intentions of platforms and platform engineering. But if someone picks that up, it doesn't really give much guidance on where to go or what to start doing from there. And I think there's a lot of levels that you can go to down to what projects might you choose within the landscape. And so I think there's probably a lot of space to play in there. So some higher level, but more tactical than the white paper, and some very, very low level tactical work. I've got a proposal, I put in an issue yesterday for a platform maturity model that would be one level kind of more detailed or more tactical than the white paper, but not down to the level of take these actions, here's a blueprint for how to do a platform. Yeah, and I just want to introduce it. I'm hoping that we can go through a similar process of eating it up, figuring out if this is even the right shaped thing to release from the working group, and then getting it, you know, wordsmithing it to the point where we're happy with it if it is the right shaped thing. So really quickly, why, what, and how. So I think the reason why we started writing this, myself and some colleagues, was that we're in a hype cycle. There's no denying that platform engineering and platforms is in the middle of a hype cycle, and it can absolutely terrorize a very good concept. We've seen it with Agile, we've seen it with DevOps, we've seen it with observability. Pick your poison, it's bad. And I think where we've seen success, I think is, I can look at like OTEL, where all of a sudden all the vendors came together and used the same language and were being evaluated against the same set of principles and intentions. And so the earlier we can set some of those up so that we're vendor agnostic, or at least vendor shared ownership, I think that'd be really good. And also because everyone on every platform engineering talk puts the same definition of what a platform is, from the Martin Fowler hosted Ed and Botcher quote. But when you actually listen to what they describe, it often differs. So getting some arms around that would be really nice. So that was the reasoning for trying to throw out a straw man to start that conversation. So what we did as a small group was we wanted to have a way to compare behaviors that we see as benefiting and detracting from success in platform engineering. So it can stay away from hype and hopefully get towards actual outcomes. And we want to take one more step from the white paper on kind of tangible tactical advice without going to the point of, you know, here's how you do it. So I don't think we're mature enough yet as a process to get there. So we identified some contributing factors associated with platform engineering, tried to leverage known formats, which is maturity model. I'll speak about the problems with that, and get some of the ideas challenged really early. So we have like 15 or 20 people have reviewed it already, just to make sure that we're not, the straw man is at least worth people's time here, rather than wasting that. Yeah, and then so the goal is to get this, offer this to the working group if it's something that the working group sees value and wants to look to publish. So as I said, maturity models, I'm sure there was at least some groans. I appreciate they were all internal. When I said maturity model, it's a thing that can be quite dangerous. So one of the sentences in the document as it currently stands is that this is not meant to be a ruler. This is not meant to be something that you can compare your teams, decide where to cut headcount, decide who's doing the right job or not. Can't stop consultants from being consultants. I was one for 7 years. I'm sorry. I'm still atoning my sins, but like we can at least try and ourselves produce something that is high value. So if people do choose to use it in the wrong way, there's at least like we're confident with the information in the background. So I wanted to start with what we were trying to answer. So I'll uncover the whole grid that we've come up with. There's going to be a whole lot of improvements to be made to it, just to be clear. But I wanted to start by saying we were thinking about what matters when it comes to platforms and platform engineering. And we identified these kind of areas that you may have different behaviors underneath. So how does your company choose to fund your platform efforts? How do you get users to engage with your platform? What is their actual interaction method? So how do you onboard them and make them interested in using it? And then what is their interaction when starting to use it? How do you manage like incoming requests and new features? How do you manage the like non-differentiating things, so abilities, so security and performance, all those kinds of things shared across the whole organization. And yeah, so from these questions, boil everything down to a word. People love to be able to take a screenshot of words. So these are the aspects that we came up with as an axis associated with things that we thought might be valuable. And then, yeah, we identified ways that we think that they present themselves from least kind of effective when it comes to platform engineering to most effective. There are lots of questions about, does everything need 4 categories, which might be less in some cases? Are they the right categories? All those things that I put into the issue as big open questions from the early reviewers that I didn't think should be solved by a small group of authors. I thought it should be solved by a larger, more cross-functional team in the working group. But yeah, so, and one thing about one thing about this is it's not meant to be that you're either level 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's like you may be level 1 in some areas, 4 in others. You may find that improving in one unlocks opportunities in another. It's sort of kind of pick your adventure was the format and maturity model we went with. So yeah, so that was what we've come up with. Within the document, there's also an it depends, which allows us to go into a little more detail about stuff. So this is an example of the detail behind funding. So it's not just that the one word, though it's helpful to boil it down. We tried to give some examples that people can use. And yeah, there's an issue open in 381, and I'd love to hear, as I say, one of the first questions you can see, the second bullet point there is there a better shape for this type of guidance? Like even the term maturity model, I think has enough issues that depending on the way this group approaches it, we may end up with a capability model, a fluency model, or something completely different, not a model at all. Yeah, and I'd love to just start the conversation about that. What does that next level of detail below the white paper look like? To start giving people a chance to say, okay, I understand the paper. I want these things. Where am I? How mature am I? Can I get there? What do I need to be focusing on? Yeah. That's all I got.
Thank you. Does people want to ask you questions?
Probably have a bunch of.
Question, but is there a designated repository for the white paper? Or they need to go on all in the packet.
So it's currently in a Google Doc, purely based on my experience that was an effective way to collaborate on the white paper early days when there's like a lot of moving parts. What we did with the white paper is it started Google Doc. It gave space for lots of comments and people to like interact about very small pieces or entire paragraphs at the same time. And then when it started to settle down and become a bit more stable, we went into GitHub issues or like into a commit into the repository and use pull requests. So that was my theory as to what might be useful. So the Google Doc, it's globally commentable / suggestible. And I'm hoping I've asked in the issue for people who want to help kind of manage this process and those people would get edit rights and be able to manage however they see fit the like contributions to it. So yeah.
Yeah, so it might be good to break it wallpaper, so we can have multiple different,
Okay,
different things.
Yep.
I think that's how we did the operator one.
and then merged it back in once it was sort of.
Yeah,
figured
once
it-
you finish, yeah, we can archive it and that'll be back to the target delivery.
Cool, yeah, so yeah, if that's a better way than Google Docs, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, the same thing happened with the GitOps working group. Started as a separate repo. But then ultimately realized that there was the benefit of having a place for long-lived, not just documents, but things that would then be versioned and additional information in so project format really made sense there. So we ended up just splitting the Git commits, like just bringing in all the Git history so that those authors still get credited for what they did, and made a PR against the tag app delivery. And so all the working group stuff was there, and then all the other things that made more sense for the project. We did the same
Still
thing
live that.
in a
And make it
separate,
archive.
yeah, in a separate Git repo.
I may come find you and figure out what that looks like.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
It's
super happy
ready
to help.
to be,
have
ready
that.
to be uploaded into the right format.
I know, like
So,
a gazillion times, so
yeah, awesome.
totally please.
Yeah, that's cool, thank you.
Cool, thank you, Abby, that's awesome. Okay, so let's go to the next. Colin, do you want to take next? The Zoom? Didn't click this Zoom.
All these ones, what is it? That's more than a chat.
Yeah, the one I put in was mine by starting. One of my own.
All right, fair warning, I don't have any fancy transitions or anything on these slides. You're gonna click through it.
Get out of here.
Have to go through this. So, hey, my name is Colin Griffin. I run a software development group that focuses on cloud native enablement. What the hell does that mean? We essentially, we build applications for folks from the ground up so that they can leverage that as their new standards of best practice. It's almost their center of excellence, a practical tool that we can actually deliver an out-of-the-box complete solution for how their cloud native application should run, function, should they run it on a platform, that kind of thing. So we approach platforms and we approach this from an application development point of view. So we're trying to enable app dev and teach them the tools that they need for IT ops rather than going to the IT ops guys and teaching them the tools that the developers need. So obligatory chat GPT quote. So the talk that or what we're talking about today really is it's just kind of an open discussion is to bring visibility to a challenge that open source and even like internal project maintainers have today, particularly now around cloud native. Because cloud native is so complicated, and if we choose to deliver solutions on a complicated system that has new skill sets that many developers, for the most part, developers don't have these skill sets yet. What are the kind of challenges that we're expected to take on? What are the things that we're expected to provide to those maintainers? And there's a lack of tooling, there's a lack of guidance in the ecosystem for how should I support my end users and my adopters through this process. So burden of responsibility refers to the weight or pressure a person may feel when they're entrusted with important duties or obligations. In particular, this feeling often arises from an awareness of the potential consequences of our actions or decisions and the expectations and trust placed on us by others. So as we publish projects and put things out there in the wild, what have I just done to myself? And what am I now expected to do for these people? So when I release an open source project, or when I bring something into my organization, or I bring a new developer on board, these are things that I expect to happen, right? Like, this is exciting. I can't wait to add more features. My README is going to have everything that everybody needs for whatever, no matter what they're going to do. People are going to comment on my app and say, this was amazing. I got it running. It's incredible, right? These are the things that we typically expect that we're going to have. But what actually happens, right? How do I run this thing on Windows or whatever other obscure ARM-based thing that I'm going to run it on? What is Kate's? What does this thing even mean, right? I can't believe you chose this tool, right? We get this like pool of negativity that just kind of comes out from nowhere and it sucks the life out of our project. And because of that, we almost want to continue going down that road and building more things, but we're all resilient and perfect. And so, we continue to build things that we put out in the wild for people, right? So I kind of want to do this around a little bit of a case study. So we got involved with a project called Gen 3. It's an open source data commons platform. So they're using the word platform, right? In healthcare today, at least in the US, there's a mandate with most of the publicly funded projects. So from like the National Institute of Health and National Cancer Institute, they're spending billions of dollars and giving them to research institutions. But there was a big problem where this research wasn't being made available publicly. So people would get all this money and then the research would go poof and disappear forever. That sounds like IP grants and things as well, right? And that's why open source is so important, because now at least somebody got the good from that stuff. But this platform, Gen 3, it's from the University of Chicago, and it's an open source platform for this concept of data commons. So enabling other research institutions to consume and download data. The challenge that they face is, yes, they built a great open source solution, and yes, they put it on Kubernetes, and yes, it's microservices and everything else that's buzzwordy today. But the problem was they wrote their own custom operator. They loved their bash scripts, right? They built it for EKS, right? They have Terraform scripts, but it's for EKS. So how did this manifest? So again, a research grants mandated data commons, and this is kind of the flow. Adopters are seeking end solutions. They're seeking projects, and then they're working backwards. So they select Gen 3 to say, I'm going to run a data commons. And then they say, oh, how do I run this? That comes later. Then they suddenly discover the Kubernetes thing. And then they try to go down their Kubernetes journey just to get this platform to run. And then they go back to the maintainers and say, how do I run Kubernetes? And that is not at all what the project is about, right? The project is about creating a federated way to share data amongst research institutions for the greater good of the world, right? So these project maintainers aren't thinking, great, now I have to support Kubernetes. Now I have to support people that want to customize this thing in React. Now I have to support X, Y. It's terrible. So this is a crappy little diagram that we use, but we expect too much of our users, and we expect that they go down a different maturity pathway. We're thinking, oh, they've got mature IT teams, they're in a big organization, they're going to think about the infrastructure first, then they're going to figure out a way to manage the infrastructure, then they're going to select an application that fits their infrastructure, and then that's going to meet their business goals. The reality is they're coming from the opposite direction. They're going to say, what are my business goals? Need a data commons. Find me an app for this. Okay, now how the hell am I going to run that app? And that's going to create all kinds of challenges. So the challenges for these Gen 3 guys that you watch they're going through is they've got a massive amount of community growth out of nowhere, but people are asking the wrong questions. So they're already trying to solve, or how do I manage an open source community? But we all know that that's a pain. They lack skilled resources, so that University of Chicago actually has 1 or 2 people that understand somewhat Kubernetes. They don't have mature platform teams. They don't have the guidance. They're managing expectations for opinionated adopters. So everybody has their own way of running things, and they're going to come and argue on this stuff. And what's happening is that's pulling attention away from their core application. They should be thinking about, how do I help somebody run a data commons, not thinking about how should I run Kubernetes. I hate to harp on Kubernetes, but we all know that Kubernetes maturity is a challenging thing today. So what are the conditions? Cloud native apps are hard, right? People are still figuring this stuff out. Demand is exceeding supply. So demand for information and help is exceeding the ability to actually support these people. Kate's expertise isn't there yet, right? It's still, we're a small group in a room, but I think, I don't know how many nines of percentage do we have where people don't have any idea what Kubernetes is, let alone understand how to run a load balancer on their own machine, or the concept of a load balancer. And we have a tremendous amount of tools to choose from, and it's causing deadlocks. Everybody's afraid to commit to a certain tool. There's no end all be all, there's no right tool. And that's the beautiful thing about this, but it's also creating huge challenges. So what's being done? I kind of left that blank, intentionally, because we're kind of trying to discover and figure out like how to do this. But just to talk about what this means for app delivery is that we're unintentionally taking on this burden. We do still need to find ways to support those users. We can't just say it's not my job. The reality is users are finding us at our projects and then need to be routed back to a place that they can go get the information and serve the information. It's kind of relevant as we're talking about the artifacts, right? If I had a way to guide that person through my project back to platforms, right, back to the white paper, back to app delivery, or a way to say, this is how we did this thing, then that will provide a lot of context to the users, like the what, the why, the how, and also provide some strength and a foundation that we're referring back to that my project might not have. So we must find creative ways to help users or find partners or somebody that we can hire, or if we even have the funding available. And we work with a lot of small and medium-sized business. They don't have the money. That's just the reality of it. We do need to provide guidance or at least redirect adopters. We need to be clear and honest with them, even at the risk of abandonment. So if I tell somebody, I don't know enough about Kubernetes, but I built this thing on Kubernetes, which is a very real thing, they might just abandon my project and go away. And so that's scary. But this does create an opportunity, at least for groups like these. It creates a funnel for consumers and contributors that we can leverage to redirect people back to these groups. So a couple quick thoughts on that, and then we're essentially done. How do we protect ourselves? So people that are building solutions on Kubernetes and are with a cloud native approach, they need to embrace the concepts that made Kubernetes effective at its core, right? We need to embrace the platform. We need to provide tools for interoperability. We need to make sure our products are interoperable. We need to make sure that they run on the core platform and don't require a bunch of customization. One thing that I'd love to see more, and I don't know how to make this happen, but be a derivative. If we can find ways to enable other communities that are coming up with these concepts to just add their little piece of clarification for what does a platform mean in fintech? What does a platform mean in healthcare? What does a platform mean for a small company? What does it mean for internal dev teams? Those can provide really, really valuable clarification, help people discover something that's validated to their use case, but then also can direct them back up to the core so that we don't have to do as much work back up at the upstream to say, well, your definition doesn't really fit what a platform is, but we know in fintech, it might not fit our core broad definition, right? There might be clarification that needs to make. So be a derivative, identify community initiatives that you can redirect people back to, if you can identify them, clarify referenceable standards, provide artifacts and references. So use artifacts and references other people have produced. When we do big research papers, right? We include sources and we direct people back to the research. Why are our projects not doing this? Work with organizations like the CNCF, small plug, and funnel the community back to upstream initiatives so you don't try to do everything yourself. And so talking about this today, some of the needs that we have here coming from a project maintainer standpoint is we need an easier way to find or identify some of these open initiatives. Like, where do we actually go to get help on these projects, to get guidance, to redirect users back to? How do we do that? How do we report how we're meeting these standards? I don't know. I'm not sure. We need consumable or referenceable artifacts. So the white papers are a great place to start. I would love to have a way to, even going back to the maturity, I would love to have a way to say this data commons platform meets the maturity of a platform in these ways, and maybe it's immature in these other ways. And that's a great way to redirect somebody back and get exposure for my project, right? Do a case study. And then, we need guidance on platforms or whatever other initiative for those that are in communities or individual or have individual project initiatives. So it's not enough for many projects to say you could just donate this to the CNCF. That's not going to happen for the majority of things. So we do need a way that these projects, and going back to the vendor thing, that these projects that aren't going to be donated can still get support and can still provide value back to the system somehow. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight some of those things from like an adopter point of view. It's great that we're defining all these standards, but there's still a massive amount of turmoil and shifting and changing, and it's all of our communities can do a better job of working together through maybe doing some of the derivatives work, but even at the maintainer level, it's really, really, really difficult to discover where to go to get some of this information, like the things that we're putting in the white paper. So having a communication framework or a way to contribute in other ways would be really, really helpful too. So that's it.
That I just wanted to say, like, as you were talking, I was reminded of Jen's use cases, like healthcare use, like that. Maybe that's the person we write up. Here's the challenges that we saw trying to meet this, and write it up, and that could.
Yeah, absolutely. And projects like those, they're like University of Chicago is like, how can we present at Kubecon because we're in Chicago? And that's it's a great use case. They're willing to collaborate. They
Writing
want
this
the
down.
exposure. So we just need to create a channel for that. But I think it's an important problem that maybe we look past because the majority of us work in large organizations, but there's a lot happening at the smaller, figure this out level.
I think also like connecting the dots, like, for example, if suddenly you're seeing Kubernetes, it's like, okay, like, how do you connect that back to a general platform story and kind of, work backwards to, solve kind of the business outcomes? I think maybe providing, and I don't know if we can do this as part of the maturity thing or whatever, but kind of providing a framework on how to think about these things. And I think the industry use case one is really good because then we kind of talk about specific business problems as well.
Right. Yeah, I really like just the ability to, it's almost a scapegoat to a degree, right? It's just send somebody somewhere else and say, go argue with those guys.
Yeah.
Like, but this is my opinion of how this meets the definition of a lot.
That's what standards are for.
Right.
Standards change them.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm coming from a German big enterprise, and I think I already have absolutely great work, and I think platform definitions, what is a platform, what is part of the platform is very important. But from and which just also way how to think, how to bring it up as an organizational way, because I think how to think, how to build platform teams, how to think probably how to think how to size things, how to think what comes first, what comes next, how to think how to bootstrap up, because that is the thing, the organizational part is heavy, and I think a lot of accidents happens on the way.
I think that in particular is one of the things when we started the platform working group was where we wanted to go. We just started with it quite a bit more or less because we knew the definition of what a platform is, so we can start building on that. And I think it's important to get things like how to structure it, even how to build these platforms, and how to, like, all those kind of things. They are what the platform working group should do. We just need to get to them. Yeah,
That's one of the interesting things about how to structure and where I
Yeah.
think one of the weakest things with the maturity model right now, one of the things I'm really interested to have discussions around is everyone has a platform today. It's like when people say like, oh, we should start testing in production. Like, you already are. And then you can look at the results and you may not be doing it effectively. Like, everyone has something that does platforms for them, whether it be a SaaS product they're using or something bash scripts internally. So making sure that whatever we talk about for building a platform team takes up into account that it's going to be an evolution within the organization. And like, how do you absorb what is currently happening and make that effective? I think is there's very diverse ways of doing it right now. How do you kind of reposition that to being more effective?
I think I mentioned several times the sort of like the HashiCorp has a definition of the infrastructure as code, like how to mature to that and start off by running on the machine. When you start off by having the state file somewhere where more people can work, that and the end goal is that everything running. That's kind of like how I see it from an infrastructure code point of view. I think the same could be done when it comes to platform teams, now the structure and company to build the actual platform that would actually work. So there's a lot of things we can
Abby's work on that is probably the good next step. there.
I would say so, so.
Just a.
Yeah,
just a
Scott.
quick question about, so this is really about, also, by the way, nice presentation. Jump right into questions. And these items that, I mean, one, I keep thinking, well, what is actually missing? But like, don't we have X, Y, and Z to help? But I think if what I'm hearing is, oh, it's just not clear where those things are or how to find them. I'm wondering if those already are or could be added as intended work products or outcomes from the platforms working group.
Like build an outline, you're saying, and then fill it in.
You know, I mean, like, we have these structures for a reason, you know, it's like hearing people talk about like having CNCF projects have their own working groups under them and have working groups in their own project, and you know, just like madness. It's like, that's what I understand that the app delivery tag is for, is to try to kind of like build on some of the learnings from the Kubernetes SIGs, you know, and like say, okay, well, we'll have something that's not just about that, but a little bit more abstracted, right? And then underneath that, it makes sense that platforms working group, operator working group, GitOps working group, perhaps others, you know, would have these areas. Maybe there's some excuse me, some alignment, but to me, it makes, I don't know, like what I kept thinking is, oh, well, maybe you could give some feedback on like open some issues maybe in the tag. Basically,
Discoverability of things.
right. So it's like, basically like, right now, the place, correct me if I'm wrong, but until possible, if you wanted to have a separate repo, whatever, for now it's under tag app delivery. And it's just really issues there.
So like when you guys, like when you start a fresh project, right, if you don't have something to reference for a pattern or something, you're gonna operate this kind of in a void, right, with no direction or anything there. And part of the value that we talked about with having internal platforms and internal platform teams is a place to go to have that reference of how things should be structured. What tools should I use? How do I provide artifacts? What are the requirements of things around? And that's a great way to start, is just like, so how should we structure these communication pathways? Let's treat our own projects in the CNCF the same way. Let's build a platform framework, even if the platform is just starting with how do we communicate, and what are our project artifacts. But, you know, hopefully other people will adopt that same pattern in their own projects and still refer back to us, even though it's not a CNCF sponsored project.
Oh, I should have asked, are you involved in the platform?
Yeah.
Platform, excuse me, working group?
I'm coming to the meetings.
Right. Well, yeah, this is very
Right,
involved.
right. Right.
At this stage.
And it's funny because I got involved because I was trying to figure out more about like, well, how should we be putting platforms together and what does that look like? So that's how I discovered it. It's just, I need to learn more.
I mean, the other thing that you brought up with the individual projects also fit into what we were talking about earlier, like, so you're not gonna maintain it for 10 years as like but come tell us about it and your experiences with it, and we can all learn from it.
Right.
And
I
wanna
know
leverage
my
that.
project. I know my domain. I know my expertise and specialty. And so I can meet you guys at I'm, you know, role playing, right? But like I can meet the group at the middle and be able to provide my perspective from my expertise. And then the working
Yeah.
group can provide the platform level expertise back, right? And use that as a traction point.
I like that. All right, well, let's go on to the next. Is a good segue into Mauricio's.
Yeah.
This will be, oh, and then we're gonna have Ram, and then we'll take a break. I know we've been going for a while here. Sorry, Ram.
I will try to go fast here. Interesting conversations. I think I'm coming from a completely different angle here. I'm more like and I don't want to offend anyone. I'm more like a practical person. I want to build stuff. And for me, the only way to keep the discussions going in a practical sense and to actually get stuff done, concrete stuff done, is like we need to have some prototypes. And in order to get some prototypes, the question is like, okay, if this code is this like, you know, some configuration files or whatever, I don't think that that's that relevant, but what is relevant is like the audience for these prototypes, like who are these prototypes intended to, who are the consumers of these platform prototypes, and how are they going to interact with these things. And then as a result of that, we can actually evaluate, okay, which projects are being used, which projects are useful, which projects are having some issues, then we can go and report back to the projects, and then we can just get things going. I think that by doing, we can just have all these conversations. Yeah, my name is Mauricio Salatino. That's me. I work for a company. We run applications on the cloud and stuff. I'm writing a book. This is not a sales pitch, but I wanted to share this because I'm writing this book just because I collaborated with 9 different open source projects around platforms, and basically they needed to change stuff in their projects in order to get this working together. By doing that, I'm trying to talk less about the projects now in the book, and I'm trying to talk more about like patterns and stuff and behaviors. So the title of this presentation is building platform prototypes, but I would say that it's like also identifying platform capabilities and then linking capabilities to projects and then going into those kind of discussions. So we know we have that stuff. We need to make some hard decisions. If you are not doing platform engineering nowadays, you are kind of like doing this. It's like you have clusters with stuff installed in it, and you actually don't know what to do. It feels a little bit like what you were describing, right? Like they have something, it runs somewhere in the Kubernetes cluster, but only in EKS.
I do get a picture of my office.
There you go. It's like, those are all my clusters, to be honest. It looks like that. So we need some platform examples. And what I did for Rejects, presentation that I did yesterday, is that I had a very good friend who does a lot of MLOps, like machine learning stuff. And I'm coming more from a developer perspective, right? Like I want clusters with some tools in there so I can develop cloud native applications, right? He has a completely different kind of use cases. He has like data scientists trying to basically run some learning algorithms, and they actually need clusters because they want to parallelize work, but they are using Python and they are used to run stuff in their computers. Completely different use case, but at the end of the day, they want Kubernetes to scale, and at the same time, they don't want to learn Kubernetes. So that made me think a lot about like, okay, what are the common traits and capabilities that we need to share between these things, right? Like you have developers building web applications and backend services and data scientists training models and then deploying models. And in fact, there are like tons of similarities. I work for a project that's called Knative. It's part of the CNCF. And it's one of the projects that data scientists, like all the machine learning space on Kubernetes, are using a lot for serving their models. So, there's definitely common ground there on how they do work. So again, we need to, we build kind of like this example of small platform that it's targeting both like machine learning people, data scientists, and also developers, trying to reuse some of the tools and try to find common ground. Which tools are doing what things, and how do we configure all these things to work together? What kind of problems do we find? And then just going back to projects and report back, hey, you are like, I can clearly see that you are coming from a place where Kubernetes is not your main thing. So when we are deploying your projects into our clusters, they are doing kind of like crazy things. And then you identify that like as a Kubernetes person, then you just go report and improve these projects. So we created a tutorial where we installed all these things into a single Kubernetes cluster. I was installing that in my kind cluster, and I needed like 40 gigs of RAM and like 10 CPUs or something. I was like, no, this is not going to run anywhere. And again, we try to recognize different capabilities and different things that we can be doing in order to show people how to use these tools, but for very concrete use cases, which are more like that, like self-service things. So I need a new environment for data scientists or a new environment for developers. And the mechanisms for provisioning these environments and the tools that we were using are in some way opinionated because we are just using concrete tools. But at the end of the day, if you're doing GitOps, it doesn't really matter what tool do you use. Or if you are doing auto-scaling, you can use different things as well. It doesn't really matter. So the first thing that I showed yesterday, it was something pretty simple, right? Like just to get this demo working, we ended up having kind of like a bunch of namespaces, and it took me quite a while to configure all these tools together just to get the simple application running and a simple environment for data scientists to have something like Ray and Kserve, which is something for serving models. There are like a bunch of tools that I've been showing, like for example, vCluster and Crossplane, and how do you make things a little bit more to work together when you are using these tools for being a little bit more cost efficient, because that's the other thing. It's like Kubernetes is expensive. So when you are adopting these tools, you need to try to make things to work a little bit better and a little bit more like in an efficient way. So from that experience of like just installing all these tools together and just getting them working in the same cluster, we have learned a lot. My friend also learned a lot from the from the data scientist side of things. And we try to come up with, again, like the tutorial just for you to follow the steps and get this up and running. That can be automated, that can be shared with some people for review and saying, okay, no, I want to use a different tool. What kind of changes do you want to make in there? And also to identify the capabilities here. Do you want to use GitOps? Is GitOps a capability of a platform or not? Do you want to install developer-oriented tool into your Kubernetes cluster so developers can be a little bit more efficient and focus on things that they should do instead of learning Kubernetes? Do you want to expose Kubernetes or do you want to abstract it? I think that these are all the questions that we need to try to start answering in a way that we are not talking about concrete projects, but we can actually say, well, look, this is an example that is, a project that is solving this problem. This is one or multiple projects solving this problem. So we wanted to go into this kind of discussions. So enabling teams to do different things like data scientists or developers to do different stuff. And one of the things that for developers coming from a developer point of view, I want to enable developers to experiment, right? If I'm using Kubernetes, I want to really leverage, being able to release multiple versions of my services at the same time, doing advanced traffic splitting, having feature flags, all these things, because if I do not install this in my Kubernetes clusters, then I do not have those capabilities, right? Like I do not have feature flagging. And that's something that if I don't have as a developer, then I cannot experiment. I need to create a release and then my release will go out and it needs to work, because if it doesn't, then I'm in troubles. So we need to kind of like start defining, okay, do we want to enable experimentation or not? How is the release process going to work? What kind of tools are we going to use? What kind of methodology and all that stuff? Also, from the developer point of view, like Dapper and projects like that, that basically abstract away where my application is running, in which cloud provider, which infrastructure are we using, doing all these things and making sure that they have the right tools to build this stuff. And then the thing that I was mentioning before with Leanne's projects from vCluster is how do we enable like projects like vCluster that basically aims to help us with multi-tenant scenarios and efficiency to interop with other projects like Knative and Dapper in this case. For making this example work, I actually created around like 10 issues in all these projects that they needed to fix. So now you can have like this virtual cluster that are very cost efficient, reusing installations of other projects that are shared across, across different tenants. And these kind of collaborations, I think it takes us kind of like a step closer to actually build real life stuff that people can actually start using and to have very, very concrete examples on how this kind of like actually work. Yeah, and I will not show that, but the idea here is like we have this issue created there like in the group where we said, okay, we need to actually start creating these platform prototypes. And I totally agree with you guys, like it's very difficult to maintain these examples, but I think that the exercise, like the experience that we gain by building these things is something that we can use to report back into different projects and also into the community. I'm really like a really, practical person again. So when I think about platforms, I think about like, is this group trying to solve the entire platform space, or are we just more focused on Kubernetes and the projects that are there? And then if we are focused on Kubernetes, there are tons of projects in Kubernetes. So I will try always to scope it down and make it practical so we actually have a next step. Because if not, we like the conversations are too abstract for me and I can definitely go and execute something. So it would be great if we can just maybe creating subgroups of
Even this
experimentations.
issue was very generic, like
This was
what is the use case of this platform that we're going to build? We need to define that first.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like the other thing that I usually show kind of like when I'm showing this platform is that like I've actually defined something like an environment. Like if I do that, right? An environment, right? Like in this case, what I have is like two types of environments, one for developers and one for data scientists.
Mhm.
And you can actually provision these environments by having a common interface between them, right? Like, so if I have that interface and I can define
Like an XRD.
Yeah. So that's the thing, right? Like, and then there are tons of lessons learned here. Like that's an XRD. I didn't create an operator for that, right?
Oh, this is an XRD?
Yeah. So it is.
Oh.
So yeah. So that's like a project that it's dealing with that, but I hadn't needed to create my own, environment controller for doing this, which I think it's also a thing that I would love to avoid, like promoting people just to create controllers because they are just extending Kubernetes for their own reasons. There are tons of projects that are doing some of those mechanisms.
You think they should do that?
I think that they shouldn't. they should try to avoid it as much as they can. If there are tools that are already solving the problems. And if these tools, for example, are not solving the problems, that's where we go back and report and said, this is a common use case. Like we should also support this kind of stuff. But yeah, that's my practical view on the subject.
I feel like that fits, again, going back to the use cases
Yeah.
and stuff, like if we define use cases in certain high level, and then I saw the phrase delivery driven development like a week ago, and I like that. And that reminded me when you were talking, what is the end outcome we want? And then we could, like, one of the things we could do is build a prototype towards the use case. And that was good.
Yeah, exactly. So in the same way that I did like for data scientists, right? You just choose a bunch of projects that are being used like in healthcare.
Kubeflow.
Yeah. So that's the problem, right? Kubeflow itself, I think that it's kind of like a machine learning platform on its own, right? So I would use that like as an example of a platform, and then you can say that that platform has tons of capabilities, and it might be bloated in some way.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like you need to figure out kind of like what's the right level. I would focus on capabilities and say
Not everyone wants a platform box. You want to take the 10 different pieces and
What's
those
the
are your-
experimentation thing that you were saying? Right?
yeah, exactly.
So
So
that's part of the vision of CNCF initially, anyway, projects. I mean, the vision with Kubernetes at first, but I mean, like, as it expanded, the vision was to be able to have composability between these different projects and as much interoperability as possible.
Mhm.
And I really what I meant is interoperability, but you're talking about composability. You almost want to take these projects as building blocks and say, oh, here's sort of a profile in a sense.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
one
so-
of the words that people use for that kind of. Yeah.
it's composability, it's gluing stuff together and recognizing that you can just not pick the stuff that is out there and just put them together. You just need to write some glue on top. And that glue is really important. So we need to show people how that look like. Instead of pushing them to create everything from scratch, which is what some companies
A lot of these things are things that my company tried to solve by creating application platforms. And we call them basically archetypes.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
a certain type of archetype would kind of be the starting point.
Mhm.
And then people would be adding whatever defines that. So like basic example, just deploying Kubernetes with plus certain tools would be an archetype. And then you have a platform. And then you build on top of that.
The problem that I see with that is like, yes, but what I've seen companies doing is like, they will say, okay, we put Flask, we put Knative, we put something else, and then we build an experience on top of it. I think
Yeah.
that we are at the point where we are saying we're just putting projects together.
Yeah.
But we need to build an experience layer on top of it. And then you need to start thinking about like from the consumer point of view, how does that look like? Like Google Cloud, right? Like when you are going to Google Cloud, you have G Cloud, like the command line tool, and the command line tool gives you the experience.
Yeah, but that's how we deliver that type of experience. How we deliver the platform itself. The platform is built on certain tools,
Mhm.
and it's a starting point. And always at some point, it's going to be very flexible. And exchange parts and stuff like that. At some point, we just have to start with something.
Yeah, sure.
And so that type of idea, we just call it an archetype.
Mhm.
Our platform archetype.
So question, since we're like a bulk of this meeting is about platform working group, I'm just, is there a goal to have, user profiles to develop?
I like that term. Have you worked in standards before? Because that's what like in the MTF or I.
Oh, yeah,
I was
yeah,
talking about
definitely. I mean,
profiles.
for example, in the Helm project, that there's a pretty like, and I know we have a few Helm maintainers in the room, hey, Andy, you too. But like, you know, like there's a really good list, like right inside the community repository within the Helm org, just called user profiles. And it's really, it wasn't really a build it and they will come kind of situation. Like we're like, oh, who are they? Who would we like them to be? It's like over time, who are the users that we've seen like come in again and again and ask questions? Who are we talking to at the booths? Like, you know, who's talking, who's like presenting talks on this? They're submitting talks.
That's pretty, oh, sorry. It's funny you mentioned that, like, so on the project that I mentioned, this Gen 3 project, so many people were trying to figure out Kubernetes. They put together a Helm working group and we were providing guidance. The first thing that we did was standardize their helm charts to make sure it could be deployable anywhere.
Within the company.
No, within the open source project. So we helped them redo their helm charts, but we took them to the documentation because the helm documentation is so good. The Gen 3, yeah. And so they went through this process of like, they're going through this process of redoing their stuff. But they had 60 people show up to their helm charts working group meeting that were from all kinds of different organizations because it created that traction. Just wanted to shout out to the helm docs, like where we find our learning tools is really interesting.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, like, Helm's a really interesting project because it was the second, well, no, I guess third graduated project right after Kubernetes. But anyway, in any case, it's been around for a long time and it was part of Kubernetes 4. So like a lot of those learnings, it's easier to get because there's been a lot of use of it. The usership level is very high, so we get a lot of issues, a lot of PRs and stuff like that. So I know it's better to have that data and then to kind of work with it. But I was thinking about your presentation too, and when I was just saying that about the user roles, you know, my tag app delivery might not, or sorry, the platforms working group within app delivery might not have, you know, as many users within this community already giving a lot of feedback, just like beating down your doors with their experience. But I feel like you have some ideas of who the users are, right?
It's interesting, you mentioned it's a lot of platform chat. I'm actually super curious on tag app delivery. Like, are we equally split between the people who are creating the apps that need to be delivered and the people who are managing the tooling that delivers those apps? Or do we lean one way or another as a tag, and then some working groups could lean heavier one way or another in order to make up that higher level goal of either 50-50 or otherwise? Because I think a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about composability of the different apps is like actually coming down to the more platform engineering teams or the more like opsy oriented teams that are doing that. Some organizations truly are end-to-end DevOps, like the team is putting up their own cluster and their own apps and delivering the web apps on top of it. But at scale, you're just not seeing that very much, right? You're seeing more a team handles the creation of the cluster, another team handles providing services inside the cluster, another team handles creating end user value inside of those apps, inside of those clusters. So yeah, that's been brewing this entire day of like, I've been very heavily involved in the platform working group, because that's the side I have experience in and I feel like I could contribute to first, but I have interest in all around. I'm just not sure what the tag focuses on.
Yeah, that kind of came up in that first line when we mentioned development, and that's kind of a side line. We seem to focus more on delivery, getting it out. We are, I think most of us are platform type engineers, right? And that's one of the solutions we found to enable this app delivery for our customers. One thing you said, Scott, user profiles. I do think that there's two dimensions actually. There's the use cases, which is more like the industry or the vertical, and then you're talking about user profiles, which is
Yeah, it's kind
personas.
of like, exactly. They're definitely different things, but they relate, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's where it comes, the actual apps and development. They are the end users. We're going to recognize them by like drawing these use cases, these like journeys, like, and then looking at the personas in these user journeys. And that's the side, but it's still because they are the customers, so we are interested. That's why we are the majority of the people. It's not someone maybe writing an app, unless they are like, they know they can get some help with like, okay, I'm a data scientist. How do I deploy my app? What product should I pick? Like they should be able to come to a meeting maybe, and then or look at the tag and then the path, and then look and find something there. Like, okay, this is the path for me. This is like an opinionated set of tools that I can use, and this is a project that has them together, and I can go on a tutorial. That should be.
So you're saying we should. Our audience should include app developers explicit, like they should be able to come to us and ask, like, how should we get a platform or something to do what we need to do?
Yeah, I think we should establish those, yeah, like paths that we were talking about, and then ultimately, like the success will be someone, I think of one path of success will be someone with that use case needing to like, okay, I don't know Kubernetes what, pod what, okay, let me, yeah, instead of giving up, they like go and can find a path.
Yeah,
You
if
know,
it's,
documenting that, I'll give it more reading room as well. So if you don't have to question, they can say, oh, that's my angle in.
exactly, and this document, by the way, hasn't changed in the last 5 years. So, but like, I can just like read out if you want, just like the headlines, it'll take like 10 seconds. So it's really just, how many are there? 5 profiles, and then there's a list of not in scope. So application operator number 1, application distributor, application developer, supporting tool developer. And in this case, because it's for the Helm project, specifically Helm developer, the people that are working on the Helm tool itself. And then profiles not in scope are cluster operator, because we got a lot of questions about that. And to your point earlier, it's like, hey, we're building an open source tool. Do we also need to teach you everything about Kubernetes and how to do your cluster stuff? And the answer is probably not. Like, let's not reinvent the wheel here. And I think probably the same goes for tag app delivery.
Oops.
A lot of this came also from like Kubernetes SIG app as well. And in my understanding, I know tag app delivery is a little bit more focused because it's focusing primarily on delivery and not just not everything about applications. But there's still a lot of the learning that came from that, and some of it's distilled in some of these projects. So it might be nice to bubble some of that up to the tag now that we have the structure in place.
So do you guys consider as a part of, this was a question that I was going to ask to people today, as a part of app delivery, if I'm building a project and somebody is going to self-run this app, like they're going to run this on their own, like I typically would think of app delivery as like how my app is going to get to production, but what about how my consumers are going to make this get to production? That's part of app delivery also, right? So is that also a consideration for the working group? Is like that type of part of this? And to me, that's platforms to a degree, but there's a kind of a middle ground there.
Sorry.
Yeah, so like how my users are going to get this to production, right? Like, yeah, I'm going to assemble this using a Helm chart, something like that. To me, that is part of the guidance that tag app delivery should be.
And I don't think we have a lot of that. To some extent, there we talk about things like that. But I agree. If you are creating something for people to be able to deploy, it makes sense to go tag app delivery and learn how to deliver apps, like just by the name alone. And then it kind of depends on like, I don't think we have any working groups or projects that focuses on that. Platform might be the one that's closest to doing that. At the same time, I think we could have a working group for user experience or something like that effect, where you kind of gather those types of like how should you do Helm charts for your et cetera, et cetera. But I think the scope there might get we need someone to do that. Yeah, but that's the main issue.
Well, also we already have a lot of that in place, right?
It's kind of there's a bunch of different places that talk about things like
I mean,
That's what in our glossary we mentioned, what's a platform engineer, what's a platform PM, like that, we should add those together with yours and then figure out, well, who are we targeting here?
that's what I was thinking, is like the work that's been done in some of these projects already from this evolving community. Now it's expanded. It's not just Kubernetes anymore, right? It's a lot wider community. So we can kind of take some of those learnings and maybe mine some of those and bring them up. And when I said like, I think we have that, not to say that it can improve or be more clear, but I think in general, that's what at least structurally we have that, right? We've got this specific tag and its focus, and then we've got working groups, and where there's a gap where we need another working group, well, when there's enough people that come together and it seems to fit, then we create another working group for however short or however long. And then when you need expertise from, let's say, how do you best deliver an application? Okay, well, there's like different categorical places to look, like, are we talking about, like, oh, we're looking in the area of operators, are we looking in the area of GitOps, are we looking in the area of, application delivery, and like packaging and artifacts, et cetera, right? And I think like those are where we fill the gaps with working groups. And then hopefully, I'm thinking that those working groups have more interaction with projects, basically like what you were saying, like we need more people playing with moving these projects together and bringing these into the working group discussions. And then hopefully those working groups then bubble up too. Because like, this is an awesome conversation, but like, how many of these do we really get? Like we've got the tag meetings and they're relatively short and few between. I think they're supposed to be in the working groups. That's how you scale this, right?
Yeah, that's a way it can work.
So yeah, like, I'm excited about the platform.
Good, that's awesome. All right, I want to give Ram a chance. This is the last one of the first session. So you go ahead and do those, and
Take a lunch, please, because-
oh, we're gonna pass these also out at our booth. So don't
Yeah,
take.
exactly.
We got
Not
okay.
too much? Yeah.
Don't take too big. Go for it, Ram. Thank you so much.
It being the person between the break and everybody else, but I just wanted to spend like a few minutes talking about the Cloud Foundry story that I've picked up in the past few years that I've interacted with the community, largely because I find that there's a nice overlap between a lot of the issues that we're talking about today and some of the things that the community has gone through in terms of its experience, being like a geriatric platform to I don't want to use the word legacy because I know my team will beat me up for it. So I'm going with like geriatric platform at this time. So one of the first projects to come out of the Cloud Foundry stable after like the whole world had decided to embrace Kubernetes was kubectl. And basically in terms of architecture, Cloud Foundry had already evolved into like a massive set of tools that did a lot of stuff in terms of taking the application source code, deploying it onto something like a container, and returning like a URL, but configuring like load balancing and ingress and allowing inputs for like services to connect to and things like that. And so obviously the community thought it would be a great idea to just replace our application runtime with Kubernetes and everything would work, right? So sort of like what Mauricio was referring to in terms of take a project, and just put it together and it should work. But obviously in theory it was great, but in practice what the limitations were that Cloud Foundry was never a great tool that a developer could like come back home to in the evening. I mean, we're all working from home all the time now, but essentially use it for a project, like kick the tires, try it out on like a laptop, things like that, be happy, take it back to work and say, hey, let's try this for a new project. So it was very inefficient at being a light tool. And no matter how many times the community tried to do that, it never happened. And so that and a lot of performance issues were sort of the downside of this first approach, where they said, let's just replace our container runtime with Kubernetes and see how that works. So from there, the community went to an approach where they said, hey, there's a whole bunch of these CNCF projects. Let's start making use of those for logging and for like ingress and all of these things. And so let's really put like a bunch of these projects together and see where we can go with it. And so the approach again made a lot of sense in terms of what it was trying to achieve, like get different projects together, do the interoperability, see if they work. So it basically used like, if I recall correctly, like Fluentd for logging, PPO for ingress. It used a bunch of Carvel tools for the actual deployment of the tool itself. But then it still was like a massive beast. It didn't work on local machines. It required like 16 gigs of RAM and 5 vCPUs and something really big in order for somebody to even try it, right? So that was like, I remember trying it out
just to do some demos, and it was like $100 worth of infrastructure for a week before I could actually get something going. And so it was not easy. And now the community has coalesced around this approach where they're making use of the Kubernetes API and the Cloud Foundry API, and they've created like a very lightweight layer over it. They're using Helm to deploy. And right now, this approach has yielded a sort of a paradigm where you can get it to work on kind clusters. So it's very composable, and I think that was one of the themes that we were talking about. So earlier approaches were like, you've got to get this massive sort of set of tools, and it was very opinionated, and it was just, oh, if you're using Harbor container registry, you don't do that. So right now it's a lot more composable. So you can use like a very basic local Docker registry. If you want Harbor, you can do Harbor. If you want a Google container registry, you can make use of a VCR. So it's transformed over time into being something more composable, something you can use locally. Any sort of change you want to make in terms of, oh, I don't want to use this KPAC image building service, I want to replace it with my own, that's possible. So it's come a long way in terms of being a very massive sort of mammoth sort of technology on Kubernetes into something much more lightweight, much more composable. And I thought, this group might be interested in the story of the evolution and where we are at right now. So my talk.
Quick question, like thank you.
Sure.
When you talk about like composability, right? Like is that again, like is that composable by behaviors or by tools? Because if it's by tools, it's a little bit weird in my opinion. So you can say, okay, I want this tool in this thing, or I want to be able to build my containers.
It's a bit of both, to be honest. So I think you cannot do one without the other. Again, that's my opinion. So the tools exist because you want certain behavior, and I think behaviors just behove certain tools for it. And that's why we have the massive CNCF landscape, right? So I think it's a bit of both. So there are ways in which you can get the system to behave in the way you want.
Okay.
And there are also ways to just swap out one tool for the other.
Okay.
So,
but when you choose things to add, right? Like, because when you talk about swapping tools, that's perfect. But when I want to add something, what I want to add is behavior. And it would be great that if I don't even need to be exposed to the tool that I'm adding, I'm just getting a behavior. And usually behaviors are matched one-to-one with tools. And that's when it becomes a little bit fuzzy. It's not an experience, it's just a tool that is installed. And then I need to learn to use the tool. I'm not getting behavior, I'm getting a tool.
Right.
So that's my question. So nowadays it's more focused on tools, right? What I understand, like you can say, okay, I want to add this tool.
I mean, it really depends. So each of the components that we are actually consuming are all open source, and you can, if you have a new use case for it, you're welcome to like open a PR and contribute and stuff like that. And so I think you could modify technically the behavior of any of these components to suit what you do.
But you don't feel like I'm looking at this and like there's build, there's image registry, there's ingress gate, which is network. Like, are those like behaviors, or are those still?
I think that they're like just too low level, right? I would love to see they are like, rollouts or release strategies. What do I need to have in my setup for being able to do canary releases? What do I need to add for the feature flagging in there? Even if that's a project or a tool or a bunch of tools integrated together to give me that functionality or that platform capability.
Like deeper into ingress gateway, I want to also do blue-green with it.
Yeah, but I don't want to say I want this ingress controller.
Right.
That's too technical.
Right.
Let's not give me a
Implementation detail.
We can do a bunch of stuff with that, right?
So I think that again, in both levels, we've seen again, this is in the past. I don't know what the support for it currently, but if you wanted to enable like blue-green deployments, let's say, technically that's a capability that Cloud Foundry picked up over the years and allowed people to say, this is a rolling deployment, enable that. So it became a part of the tool itself that we are slowly porting to this version of it as well, but like, typically Cloud Foundry comes with those capabilities. So it's a very sort of cathedral versus bazaar kind of argument. And traditionally, Cloud Foundry has been known to have all of these different capabilities just built into the tool itself, and not have application developers worry about what the implementation is. And things like that.
So it's a like focus on the application developer,
Yeah.
like going wild, like and maybe the platform operator like gets less of this like easy thing, like with the from the application developer perspective, it's so like, okay, I just now can do canary deployments.
So there are two distinct personas
Yeah.
that I see in this space. There is the, I want everything abstracted. I don't want to do anything. I just want to take my code that may have worked everywhere else, throw it to the platform and build it, done. And you're gonna have your other side of the house where you're gonna have those that want to tinker. They want full customization, and being able to cater to both personas is the challenge. Especially that we're seeing now when we work with platforms and platform engineering is you need to be flexible.
Yeah,
to
yeah,
offer-
that's key. Like, because we're in the Kubernetes space, I think that the flexibility is the
Mhm.
thing. We are not aiming to create a platform that is completely abstracting everything away. We want to give choice. But that's why I'm talking about capabilities, right? Like, do you want to build your containers in your clusters or not?
Yeah.
What do you need? Kind of what configurations, what kind of projects are going to do that for you? You should be able to say, I want that,
Yeah.
and then that things gets installed. A bunch of things gets installed.
Spring Boot starter.
If you're familiar with the TV show Seinfeld.
Yeah.
Just tell me what you want.
Tell me what
That's
you
all
want.
I care about.
Yeah,
It'd be
yeah.
interesting to get an insight into how many people fall into those personas. So I think one of the places
Correct.
where people fall over is they try and cater to both, when actually the tinkering persona, depending on the organization,
Yes.
may be a very small.
Ultimate
percentage.
range.
Exactly.
And they can just be given a Kubernetes cluster to go
That's
tinker with if they really care.
Yeah.
But like the 95+, if
And
that's the
that's
case.
where you,
I
and
don't
that's
think
where
we
you had
should
a
study
constant
that, so.
iteration and evolution of, okay, maybe this didn't work.
Yeah.
But you had the flexibility to then say, nope, it's not gonna scale it, bring it back a little
And I
bit.
think we talk about like minimum viable starting, like people, I think when we tell people they have to be flexible, they start with they have to cater for all. Basically cater to,
Correct.
and like, let's build that experience great, and if that means that 5% will always need handholding, it's a heck of a lot better than 100% today. So like, cool, but.
Yeah, I was just going to say that comment works in theory, but in practice, I've never found that to be the case. It's almost always had to be fall back on the, here are developers and operators and that kind of division in terms of who these consumers are versus here are application developers who want to be abstracted versus here are like a set of people who really care about what the individual tools are inside the cluster that things work. So I found very few.
I think that, I mean, your model with everything kind of from one source, like OpenShift is a little like.
Yes,
that too.
yes,
So
yes, oh
I
yes.
think I can appreciate
I was
that.
probably gonna say, I mean, isn't like what, well, I think he's just left now, but isn't kind of that argument about like, I just want ingress, I just want blue-green, I don't care about the options. It's like, that's what,
Just a good package.
yeah, I mean, and this is really like what, vendors provide, right? They provide their services. It's like, you want to work with Red Hat? Cool. This is how we do the things. You want to work, you want to do stuff on AWS? Not that those can't work together, but here's how you do this. Here's how Azure does our thing. And, you want code fresh? We do it this way, etc. I think ultimately the people that are maintaining these tools, we want to keep them as, we want to think about what the scope is, keep them as well scoped as possible. Make them keep them as flexible as possible. And sometimes I think over time you find out, oh, the scope was too wide. Now there are other tools that can take care of that piece of this, I think it's just an evolution process.
The issue with the like all-in-one solutions for some people is that an app dev may be like, I want blue-green, I don't want to think about it, or I want feature flags, I don't want to think about it. But there's someone in your organization that's going, we are a PCI compliant, secure, we have to meet these
That's right.
requirements, whatever.
They start breaking down the
Therefore, you
platform and
must
looking
have
at the pieces.
No lock
two
in.
keys
Yep.
before you can turn on the feature flag, and we
Exactly.
have to provide that. And so it's like, that's why I think your point about getting personas down and discoverable, to your point, by people who have the different needs is really important, because there's, I think, a big upfront platforms are, that's where they're becoming, as you're describing, more exchangeable for parts, because you're finding that there are people in the organization who do exchange bits. How do we enable them to do that? And so, but other people who just don't care,
Yeah.
as long as it still has that capability, I'm happy. Just different person.
That's kind of what we're doing inside my company, like our group. But we're providing the solution, pay fast and wisdom. You want a database, you should use RDF, you should use Postgres. This is the Terraform model that Hamster you can use, but you can always create a site which is only a pay fast, you can make your own, you can use DynamoDB. But you need to show the compliance people how you're going to work on those, all those kind of things that we solve. But in our solution, you have a good way to get user access to production, which is compliant with everything we need. So you need to replicate that right now. But, and that like for us, that's what it's meant when the name platform came for our group. I don't think that tag is the right place to say this is the right thing to do or this is the right place to do, but it's a great place to gather the landscape inside those working groups and say that the GitOps working group is a good example because we have Argo to do, we have Flux and we have other projects and tools inside and outside the CNCF, and the working group is a good place to come and if someone is building a bit of solution, go see what they're producing for you. Design your solution, build it to a company.
So that's a perfect segue. I'm
just gonna say one more comment. I think like as part of the platform working group, one thing we're talking about is like even more than just like recommending the what, it's also how to think about the problems, right? And I think like if you're going to investigate some open source tooling, like what questions you should be answering, like you know, kind of tying that to org requirements as well, I think is important. Like, hey, like the vendor lock-in thing or there are other things as well. Do I build versus buy? Like I think there's all these kinds of questions, which I think as a part of platforms, we can help at least like provide some like thought leadership on how they should be thinking about those questions. Right?
I like that. Yeah, formerly perhaps that's what the CNCF Tech Radar was doing. I wonder if maybe I wonder if maybe like the tags are going to take subject matter expertise on some of those.
We're not trying to stop people that are already doing good things, but yeah, we can maybe
Not
that's
take, but
maybe we should
offer,
look at what they're doing and
yeah, offer support.
there's a lot of
Yeah,
over.
I love that idea about the question. Plus one.
All right, let's I want to give everyone a break for people that have been here for the past 2 hours. I know that, but let's start with the working groups. That's our next topic, and I want to let, if we want to talk about artifacts first, let's talk about that first. I don't want to talk about platforms first. It's enough platforms
We'll
already.
give you something new.
So let's come, what time is it now? It's already 3:08. So let's say 7 or 8 minutes, 3:15, which means probably a few minutes past that.
Is there coffee?
Time forgets to do.
I know. If I say 7 minutes, then it'll be 15. If I say 10,
Hey,
it'll be a half hour.
Isn't it nice?
Yep.
Nice.
Don't know, actually, good point. Somebody should stick around.
Nice to be cool.
Yeah, we'll be back.
Nice to meet you.
I gotta stay up and stretch a little.
I just
Blood clot.
this morning.
Hey,
Where do you live?
You wanna work on Seattle?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've been working on it because I needed to, but I'll actually.
Okay. What's gonna happen?
2020, when
Yeah.
pandemic actually the day they closed the campus.
Oh, really? Yeah, I do. I don't know, it was a laptop, but, so you work on
But my
We need to
perspective,
get
I want
done, we have
otherwise
less
it's
than 24
all-
hours, I mean,
The only reason.
I hear you. I love it.
Yeah,
well, I mean,
why,
Obviously.
last year before, and I'm already out of the game, right? So you're away from building my own, like building in-house, I've already lost the plot on what is important and what are the problems and all that, so. we need more. So maybe-
I mean, for sure on the last talks, one is me and one is Alex, like. We don't have to do those. if We don't want.
I was just gonna give a quick update.
Oh, for this?
But you don't need, I mean, again, it was, I can talk about it on the talk, the day after. The talk,
I mean, it's up to you.
It's, I
if
mean,
you
you're
wanna-
saying like a good time.
Oh, no, we have plenty of time for this. I'm more, yeah, I mean, the
not
lightning
much.
talks. Okay,
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, it was just an update of the opening the Slack again and.
you should call it
Oh,
an
the
official
operating-
WG. You should call it an official working group. maybe.
Yeah, it's called the operator white paper.
Right, right.
It's like tag app deliver operator white paper. That's it was very, because it was like a dormant
Yeah.
working group, and then it's like waking up again.
I was thinking of bringing
Yeah,
that stuff up, but it's not a good
It's,
time slot, but just the way we govern the working groups and everything.
That's what I was going, if we go to that part, but if it's. I guess
Okay,
it's
oh, that's
time-
perfect. That'll be agreed. 'Cause that way you could talk about operators and you can also talk about like working groups and stuff that way, like how we envision it, like, cause they're gonna talk about this artifact.
Yeah,
Mhm.
We'll hopefully learn from that.
I'm gonna just.
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, do we have some time to do it tomorrow today, like just please see how we can do kind of, I intend to talk about these and then there's the next, like just a little.
Okay.
Oh, me and you for the Thursday one? Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Oh, yes, yes. No, I'm desperate to do that too.
15
I
minutes.
thought we would do that Friday. No, for sure we could. What are you doing tonight?
Well, I mean,
You're busy tonight. Between tonight and tomorrow.
anytime.
Okay.
anytime.
I mean, I'm ready. After this, I'm having a challenge.
Like, until the end.
You know, right?
Deal with it. No, and my priority is that because we have had time to.
Yeah.
So it's my priority, actually, I'm saying it's my priority.
Okay, so you'll put that on the-
Dry roast. Yeah.
I mean, maybe at 5. I'm not like,
It's like.
I need to message them like that. 5, you
yes,
say.
oh no, he's not gonna come back because he's captain.
When is he going to see?
This, just in case.
I don't know how
I
to-
don't know, Are you going to the CNCF thing tonight, 5:37?
Like I said, my priority.
Ask Thomas if he's going to that. If he is, we can go to that. Yeah, I got. Let's see what Thomas is doing. I can be flexible tonight too. All right, it's 3:20, so only 5 minutes late, but we knew that was gonna happen. The next part of the meeting, thank you so much, our presenters. That was, I mean, to me, that was really great. It's not just about what you all talked about, but it gives us an opportunity to just hash some things over as a group. Next, we want to go over some of the tags work in progress. In particular, we're gonna hear from a group we've been floating the past
Floating.
few weeks, so we want to hear their proposals. Me?
Yeah,
Sure. What do you want me to put up there?
the deck.
Oh, yes.
You know, the deck.
Find it.
You made it down for the artifacts.
Pretty.
Their particular after event today that we should. be looking at.
There's like,
I know there's a lot.
It's really-
It's like,
Yeah.
there's some workshops.
Yeah.
and stuff.
When is this gonna fire?
I'm on conference parties, but. Not that it's important.
You gotta connect, you gotta connect with the community.
Exactly.
That's like the whole thinking and other.
To not open for people things and then have. So it's not. And then and then I got 3 parts at the same time. No, I have stuff like that, CNCF and that's the other. But I'm currently going to this event, which I never can miss. Speaking of, it's events. I heard people say, I didn't even see that.
Oh, I see it. Yeah, the hive mind.
Yeah, but I think that's all.
I'm gonna slideshow it, Andy.
Yeah, sure.
I was supposed to go and then people from the company was coming from Norway, so I thought, yeah, I'm not gonna go. And then, we were talking to those people, and then like, you need to come to our party, but oh, we're waiting this in 2 seconds, and all of a sudden, oh, by the way, we're waiting the same thing about that.
So we can store these party invites as artifacts.
Oh,
Yes.
Here's a transition
Oh.
to the.
Artifact, perfect.
That's a skills open source.
All right. So do you need an introduction? Do you want to
I'll just give a
introduce
quick
yourself?
introduction.
Okay,
Hey everyone, anything you'd like, I'm a single architect at Red Hat, I'm a core maintainer on the Helm project with Scott. And in addition here, one of the efforts that I've been focusing on recently and was actually brought into Helm to finalize is OCI artifact support. Next slide. Like, so we know that the world of cloud native computing is full of artifacts. Artifacts are all over the place when you think about it. An artifact is a container image. An artifact is a binary representing a jar, an NPM model, or you name it. Unfortunately, with every single type that we have out there that has evolved over time, each one has its own properties, each one has its own format, each one has its own way of transporting from one to the other. How do you how do you actually keep your hands upon it? All of them, and they keep getting bigger and bigger. As more and more of these tools continue to evolve, how do we try to handle and use them in cloud native computing? Because I work with a lot of organizations across the globe. I'm basically an architect, focused on customers, so I see everyone. And when you go into any customer, what tool do you have? What capabilities do you want to enable? And it's always bespoke. Always going to be, here's my implementation here, here's my tool of choice, and it's impossible. So how can we get our handle upon that? And one of the things we can do is look at ways of managing it. Because right now, I don't think we have a good way of managing different types of artifacts within Kubernetes, within the cloud native space. And this working group really is to get our hands around the concept of artifacts and the ability to try to standardize not only how we manage them, how we store them, how we search for them, all of that. That's a good tip. Okay, awesome. So some of the things that we're looking to do potentially within this working group, everything from how we bundle applications, how we handle release management, application delivery workflows, how we manage configuration and source-driven workflows, how we do package management. There is one benefit recently that came out regarding artifacts, and it's being able to potentially store them in a canonical way. OCI. How many of you are familiar with OCI artifacts? It is a good
artifacts.
It's a good reference use case. It's not the end all be all. I've had long conversations with Josh to say that we want to potentially look at starting with OCI artifacts, because if you look at container images, look at SBOMs, you look at Helm charts, they can all be stored in registries as OCI artifacts.
You might say it's not the end all be all yet.
Right.
Right, because OCI has
Your vision.
an extensions mechanism. There's ways to improve upon it without having to go through the same process that you had to go through for years to get the artifact spec, the distribution spec.
I am very bullish. I feel that OCI artifacts is pretty much the end all be all, because we're already starting that journey, but it's not even remotely close to finish. The OCI 1.1 specification is this close from getting adopted. There's a couple pieces got to finish up, but that will allow providing a definition of what an OCI artifact is. Toddy's in the room. He's very familiar with a lot of the work that's going on in 1.1. Toddy's from Microsoft, if you don't know him. So the idea is that we want to bring together a lot of the folks who are currently working on OCI artifacts from a definition and reference, classification standpoint with app delivery, because people need to be connected. We don't want to create these in bespoke instances. So we want to use this working group as a way that we can bring all these different players to the party.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's what the working groups are about.
So some of the goals that we're looking to do offhand is, creating a draft artifact common data model between different types of artifacts that are out there. how we can go ahead and search for artifacts. I look at, you know, like Helm. Helm had a feature where you can search different charts that are within a repository. You can do it somewhat with the Docker API, but it's very limited.
Yeah, you just can't do it,
It's,
basically.
yeah, you can do it. It's possible. It's possible.
Well, it's not there.
a
enough
certain
for us
persona.
To be able to build it in, right.
It's not scalable. It's not, it provides a very legacy way of working with containers.
And essentially, we're blocked from doing that in Helm. We're blocked from adding the search capability in Helm currently.
So with OCI 1.1, there will be like a very small step actually going there by actually searching the referral.
In your first API.
Because you can search by artifact type there, but that's the only thing. But we are already hitting problems with that because you may have multiple artifacts that are from the same type and using this generic IANA, for example, media types for that, it's like, okay, how many of those? And I need only one of those. Typical example is we'll be presenting tomorrow vulnerability management with that. And if we have more than one vulnerability report, actually you want the latest one. So the referrer type right now, the filtering API will not provide you this capability at all.
The refers API, for those who aren't as familiar with OCI justification, is a way to add additional metadata to the manifest. It allows you to provide references of the source and the who it relates to. At a high level.
From one OCI object to another, you
Right.
can reference them and you can create your own. Yeah.
Typical example is if you have a container image and you can say, okay, the S-bound for this container image, and you can link them in the registry itself, and the referrer can return the S-bound for the container image.
It's like a link in HTML.
So there are a lot of interested parties around the search API, and there's this whole working group kind of started from that search API, and we said, okay, we really want to have this, we want to implement this type of search, but we're thinking too small. We can go base a bigger scope. So that's why I worked with Josh, worked with a number of different folks in the community saying, okay, let's put a working group together. Also started with another project before the OCI registries and storage project. It's actually the library that Helm uses that covers to transport Helm charts. So we're all coming together to try to tackle this large challenge together. So some of the activity, go ahead.
Oh, are you gonna read these? Are you done?
I kind of went through most.
So I was just gonna add, the one thing I was gonna chime in here from the tag perspective, probably say prototype implementation instead of reference.
Mhm.
That sometimes CNCF doesn't like.
That's fine.
Oh, yeah, can you please type that out right now? I actually had like, so we're basically like right on the edge of either being completely blocked from doing this, or completely full steam ahead. And it seems to be hinged on whether or not the OCI org itself is a better place to have a working group than, than CNCF. And personally, I think it would be great to do under OCI. My big concern is that, there's gonna be an OCI meeting tomorrow.
Right, I was wondering if you guys had talked with them yet.
Yes and no. Yes, we have.
Yes.
We did go to the last OCI meeting.
Okay.
And had some conversations, and there were definitely two minds in the room, and from people who have been there for a long time.
You could see it in the issues that I have looked through.
Yeah, and the thing is, I feel like the most important thing is like, let's not bike shed here. Let's just move ahead, and if OCI wants to maintain a working group and we can have some of the same members go across the two of them, then fantastic. But we know that we can move ahead and be really productive, make really productive working groups here. We've done it before, we're doing it currently. And we know we're doing it under tag app delivery right now. So ultimately we would really like to do this and then work with such a working group in the OCI org for the actual implementation, for the actual reference itself, for actually building that reference and going through their process, not trying to bypass them in any way. So that's the main thing we try to impress upon them. And so I think that's a really good point to keep that in the language.
like with the HTML spec and stuff, whatever, W3C, they ended up forming the WHAT as they called it, to allow for kind of experimental stuff to proceed quickly and lightweight. So it makes a lot of sense here. Like, we're not abandoning OCI, but we just need to move.
Not at all, and that's the thing is if that working group becomes extraordinarily nimble and we just, working groups within CNCF are meant to be short-lived.
Right.
They're only around as long as they need to be in order to fulfill their work products that they set out to fulfill. And then they should be dissolved.
Or evolve into something else. And
Yeah,
it's a totally
the
different.
tag.
new working group.
Yep.
So, what are some of the things that we're working on? Next slide.
Okay.
I'm gonna pick keeping the pace. That I like to talk about today. We want to gather obviously some stakeholders using OCI distributions, different parties that are out there. We want to go ahead and also look at other packaging systems aside from OCI. So other cloud native ones that we are already out there. It kind of brings in the whole ecosystem together. We working on OCI, but obviously we not want to exclude it. We want to advocate for a common format to enable search and discoverability. That's important. That is, especially when we talk about the secure software supply chain, being able to search and discover the different types of assets that are out there. Very important. Then finally, that's where we include prototype. Putting together some prototypes, tools, and forward. This is some of the activities that we are focusing on as part of this work.
And to be clear, the developing prototypes, the goal of that is that should fall outside of the working group itself and be done within, say, a sub-project of ORAS is a really good example of where we can do that. We already have maintainer, like the whole group is just like, yes, let's do it. In fact, that's where we should probably give credit to that Steve Lasker put together a whole group of folks, including Andy, myself, and
Me.
other, yes.
We were buddies at Microsoft.
Yeah, exactly. Josh and, and even, like Justin Garrison and like various people from like these different major container registries who are just on board to want to, move ahead with this.
A lot of
By the way, Steve's at Docker now. He said I could tell him.
He's yeah, I know. I wasn't supposed to.
So there are a lot of very interested parties. And one of the goals that every one of us who has kind of been on this effort for a while is that we can't just do this in a bubble. We need everyone's help. Because I think we can build some pretty cool things and enable a lot of capabilities. That's what we're kind of all thinking about, but don't have the ability to actually put into words or into practice. So, last slide.
I mean, I'm just thinking of like ORAS in a way is it's not a prototype, but it is a
so that's
tool.
So I have a bit of an ulterior motive. All this has ulterior motive that is that the work we started in ORAS could be that first jumping off point to start making tangible outcomes. Because we've already thought about it, we already have a lot of interested individuals, and we actually have some code that we can start to reuse as well. So let's go. Let's see. So if you want to get involved,
I was just gonna say, like we do want to try to bring in some of these others if we can, like.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Once again,
Like even like Carvel and ImagePack, they do something there. So that's what I was looking at Ram.
Absolutely. Oh, who's working in Carvel?
I was looking at Ram because he works on Cloud Foundry, right next to you, left.
Oh, you. That guy. Sorry. Yeah. Gotcha. Yes, exactly. And Josh, you were very helpful so far in championing this within the tag. Because working groups do need a sponsor, and you are sponsoring this, and have helped to bring in some other examples of packaging formats. So yeah, the charter has a bunch of that in it.
Cool. Yeah. Sorry.
Last time. So if you want to learn more about kind of the lineage of this working group, you can check out the issue. It's currently on the Tag App Delivery repository. There's a charter out there that has all these different considerations, thoughts laid out. And I need to work with you to open that Slack channel up.
Yeah, that Slack channel is private. I gotta ask Amy. I think we can call it tentatively G.
Yeah. So anyways, the goal would potentially open it up by now, but I'm just a little more. So,
Process.
this is really our thoughts around the tag F delivery artifacts working group. We look forward to everyone's contribution, interest, and thank you for taking the time to allow me to present with your, to not only host this working group, but we've been looking for a nice home. This is a ideal location that has good visibility to bring in all those interested parties, and especially giving me the time and the very, very, very tight schedule to be able to spend on it. Thank you.
Yeah, so the idea was in this section to talk about all of the tags. I mean, I can talk briefly about platforms if we want. There's not that much to say, except I wanted to use the opportunity to tell people how to contribute. So specifically, and I'll stop sharing. this.
Just a quick question as you're changing the slides.
Yeah.
Where would be a good place to? I mean, we've already put the issue out in mailing lists and on GitHub. Where would be a good place to hear feedback from folks about reasons why they might not think it's a good idea? You know, for this
Yeah, how do we
working
get
group?
more feedback on the proposal?
Yeah, and I'm seeing some people kind of going back and forth, but I feel like some of the conversations aren't connected.
I guess that would be the tag out delivery meeting, like
Yeah.
taking that up as a item.
We brought it up there, but yeah, we need to bring it up again, and then we need to finalize it. And actually, I was saying to Jen before, like, that's actually, you guys are an impetus for us to put some structure to how we form working groups. It's been internally to, I think the last working group was formed internally, or did we get it approved by TAC also? So we should make sure we understand the process.
Sure.
Well, I mean, I got it all validated. Basically, the process. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay, yeah. Basically, the process is right now the only process that exists within CNCF we're following. So I guess the process that you're thinking of that you would need, it would be kind of bespoke to this tag, or it would have to be something that's implemented across all the tags in CNCF.
So do you know that, does the TAC have to sign off on the new Ouija? Is that? Or
No.
Okay, so then it's just us. So then, yeah,
Yeah.
let's bring it up at the next meeting and let's move
Yeah,
it forward.
you need feedback from TOC. And so that's why.
I mean, we have their
Right.
we have informed them now at this point. And
Yes,
just have
exactly.
the opportunity, so.
Exactly, and that's what basically like both Amy and Chris A said the exact same thing, got back on email and they were just like, yeah, everything you did was, we did the correct thing.
But I think it's basically just like pull it off and the tag out delivery. And if anyone has anything against it,
Mhm.
we can get that feedback and then probably think about it more or less.
Yeah.
If not,
Mhm. We've let it simmer for a little bit now. It's.
Yeah, well, Thomas mentioned something today. I don't want to speak about him because the other room, but it's more like something he said to me, something I can say it, is that he's not sure that this is the right tag for this. And then I said, well, what would be then? Ultimately, definitely looking for feedback. And his only thought was, what about the OCA org? I'm like, okay, well, that's bringing that back to that issue. And I think we've already covered that pretty clearly, both with talking with the OCA org and just saying it can be a yes and it doesn't have to be an either.
Yeah, I like that. That helps.
So
I mean, the only other thing is it could be a tag, but that seems
I just feel like
too much.
it is too much.
yeah, because that is a long lasting thing
Yeah.
that should go on basically
Let's just
forever.
start with
And
this and then
so
if one day you need to be a tag,
It
do
could be
that then.
converted.
I have no interest
Exactly.
personally
Same.
in like creating a tag for this. You already have the structure set up for it. Basically, like a working group in CNCF can either be under the TOC or run internally by CNCF staff or Linux Foundation staff, or be under a tag. And I don't think there is another tag that's better for this.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and in the worst case scenario, you can pull it out and push it into the org itself. So it's not under any one particular tag, but I agree. I don't think it fits better anywhere else.
The biggest issue okay, cool. The biggest issue that I heard as another distraction, and I just want to mention real quick, is that there have been some working groups that have just kind of gone inactive. And I think it's important to impress upon the people who are in this tag that is certainly not going to be the case for this. There's an extraordinary amount of energy behind this. I think our concern is to make sure that we don't bike shed around process, that we find the correct process, a correct process, move through it in a way where it can be fair, transparent, open, and all of that, which this is some instance, yeah. And then just get moving so that that energy doesn't just
Yeah,
form inertia, you know.
maybe, I mean, and to your point, is there a way to archive groups or something?
Well, I think that
Yeah,
there ultimately
open.
is, and that's something that it would be nice to follow up with you about separately from that, that's related to all the working groups, because
Mhm.
there's two inactive working groups, right, under this
Chaos
tag?
never became officially active, so.
Got it. Well, they're listed as inactive anyway, and that one could be seen as a failure, you know, because it was like, oh, that was prematurely accepted. And the other is inactive because it succeeded.
Right, because you moved on.
Right, it totally succeeded. And I think that it's really important to highlight that because that's a success story for the tag. So, and and that will be, I think, good feedback for all the other working groups is like, well, when will you know you're finished?
Mhm.
You know, and how do you know what's your success metrics? So, I mean, something we can follow up on, but just to say that there's certainly enough of that, I think, in this case.
Yeah, we have a lot of eyes on you. Like I was just saying, like, we want to learn from this to establish process. So
Yeah.
if you all disappear in a couple months, then we'll establish that process. Cool. Yeah, so platforms working group. We've got the paper out. I want to show you briefly what comes next for the paper. Struggling with the mouse all day here. The canonical guy. Fedora. Let's see. So if I go to the repo. The way that it's structured now is the two papers that we maintain are kept at the top level of the repo, and they have a latest and V1. Both of them only have V1 at this point. And this latest directory is symlinked into the website. The website is a Hugo website. I've never gotten to walk anybody through this before, so I might as well let you know if you want to contribute. It's just Hugo. Everything that we publish is in the content section. So white papers is actually just two symlinks to those back there.
Where's the website? I didn't know that there was one.
Oh,
There's the website.
Announcement.
oh my. So then I should have started there. You didn't know about this?
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was actually supposed to talk about that, but we're going to get upset now to get a little bit more visibility on the website, which makes sense if you didn't know.
Yeah,
It's
well,
my fault.
take a look.
I'm the one.
And we've had a little bit of like a Jekyll-based site, and now we transferred this over. This is actually kind of a standard CNCF format. So
It is now,
thank you to Colin, by the way. He's the one that got us started here.
but it's funny because it kind of went through a little process of like, so, Cartographos started had a website for the cloud maturity model. And so we basically just forked that and followed the pattern, and then they ended up standardizing on this for like other sites.
Like tag
Platform
and
did its job.
stability. Right? We did. This was great. This was a good experience.
I love that.
So yeah, we've got this whole thing. Actually, if you want to, right now in the about section, there's just Ouija platforms because there's somebody here that really likes Ouija platforms. But if you want to add like open GitOps or reference here, or
So that was
Ouija
something else
artifacts.
to talk about. We need to be added into that.
it's very basic, we just tried to get it going, whatever we needed to do. But this is where the white paper is published, actually. So if you have, if you contribute to the latest version, and once it's accepted, it'll show up here momentarily. That's the idea. And then eventually, we'll cut a V11 or something.
And you can submit languages. That's one thing, like you can submit internationalized versions of this in the concept folder.
Yeah, somebody in our chat wants to do that actually, and we want to help them out.
With the GitOps principles and glossary, make sense here. We do have translations and versions.
I mean, it's up to you all, but I would love to have it.
I
all
think
here.
that even though we have it on the website, like it makes sense to be like you can add it here if you want.
Or just a burden on you, maybe some too.
I have a lot of burdens. Another one.
And then there's a blog. So, by the way, so folks can contribute, like, you want to contribute other articles to the blog from GitOps or artifacts or anything like that, just put it in here.
I've been meaning to ask when it comes to blogs and stuff like that. is there anywhere we like put in like suggestion, or how do we, you know, that?
Like if you want to make a post, like how do you go about that?
If I wanted to add a post, do we have some sort of like, someone that looks at it and say, yeah, this seems like a right fit for the child.
We have a little, I mean, there's code owners on the site, so we
Just make an
won't,
issue, I think.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
just do it as a
Yeah,
PR.
so we can just do that.
I mean, you could open an issue first. That's not a terrible idea if it's something that
Yeah.
nobody knows anything about.
It's a markdown file.
Yeah.
In the blog folder, so.
I'm just thinking both for if I wanted to do something on perhaps both the Open GitOps blog and then as well here. And you know, to me, it doesn't really matter, but at the same time, like others, people are asking me how to send in, do we have anything thought about around that, or is it just basically do a pull request?
I mean, in terms of what kind of content we want in there, I mean, right now it's mostly logistical stuff, I
Yeah.
guess, around, we released this paper, we're having this meetup. But
I think, so I just came from, sorry, I'm Alex. I just came from the TOC meeting, and one of the things that I was reflecting upon as I left is that there's a real impetus towards more contributors, more stickiness to stay involved in the tag. And most people come and it's transactional, right? You got something you want to do, you do it, you leave. I would love for us to have blogs that people come back to and like, hey, they post some interesting stuff, you know, every so often. So I think we would really welcome not just thought leadership, but like anecdotal accounts of where you've used operators or platforms, or even better, platforms and operators and GitOps in earnest, right? And that would be a great thing to do. Then we could publicize it, put it on our Twitter and stuff like that.
so stuff that we can tie to the
Stuff
work in
that's
progress.
loosely tied, but we'd be happy to celebrate. I think, like,
Mhm.
hey, sure, your company's done something cool. Yeah, why not come here? As long as it's not a marketing exercise, you know, come and talk to us about it. And then we could even have spin-offs. Like, we could then interview you about it. We could then do
Right.
X, Y, Z. So I think it's something we've been historically not bad at, but we've just not directed our energy into it. Right? We've just been trying to get the bones of everything aligned, and now it's time to really sort of enable people. You know, a bit more.
One of the things, like Mauricio was here earlier, when we were talking about like short-lived projects or prototype things that you throw out after the demo. And we were saying we want to encourage more people to come talk to us about those, even if they're not going to maintain it long term. Tell us what you've learned. You know, let's learn from the smaller things. So that fits with this too. That's what I was thinking. Like if someone puts in a use case where they tried to put together platforms and operators, and it might not be a pattern for everybody, but it's something we can all learn from.
Mhm.
Alan, I love hearing that. And hi. Yeah, you know, so there is a PR in the Open GitOps project right now that is to define contribution criteria, like that, specifically content criteria. And now I'm kind of wondering, maybe that would be good to open that up for discussion within the tag, because it might be good to standardize that across the working groups potentially.
Mhm.
Um,
Anything we can do to invite, in particular, new folks to open source, to our tag, and why they might want to come back multiple times, I think is a great idea. And if you've got an idea on what that could look like, that's a great call. We should do that.
Well, it's not even my idea. Someone else opened it
Just
and we just reviewed it and tried to simplify it, and yeah, like maybe that would be good to share so that like each working group doesn't have to like come up with their own
Yeah,
criteria.
we could even tag it like
Right.
GitOps or platforms, or that would make it more interesting to people, right? Because we have more of a critical mass in the tag too. So yeah,
One
I
of the
love it.
things we did with the white paper was try to find a way to, how do you get this thing published? And like we have I don't know if we ended up actually creating the documents around it, but we were thinking about putting PRs into the tag around that for like future working groups, current working groups, or future working groups wanting to get things published. What is the process? And like, how do you make sure you get the right set of reviewers on it and the right like CNCF support for it, marketing and all that kind of stuff. So, and I definitely leaned on people who've done it before me to then
Sort of.
but it wasn't formalized or anything. So maybe
That's a good
Get
feedback. Like
that.
we should write up the process that we
Yeah,
follow
got
while it's
that.
fresh in our minds.
exactly.
Yeah.
That was on our to-do list.
Yeah.
Before we forget ourselves.
Put a really good note too. But that's interesting also, like we have papers and blogs where papers are kind of like that content that people could keep coming back to. So like the Open GitOps principles would be a good example, and other stuff we come up with.
And socializing the papers to via blogs, I think, like, for example,
Yeah.
like you launched, I think that was super helpful, like. There's some posts on the platform engineering Slack as well for it, so I think just having some discussions around that.
Those
Socializing. as well.
sorry, I was gonna say, those papers are getting quite a lot of inertia.
Yeah.
Since we wrote the operator white paper, it's become sort of a touchstone reference, I think, for a lot of companies who are sort of looking to something neutral in that space, and I'd love to see that for the platforms white paper as well.
Actually, one of the things I wanted to ask in our session on Thursday is how many people have tried to apply all of the Open GitOps principles? How many people have successfully applied them all? I mean, they definitely go to there and look at them and get inspired. And I'm just wondering, do they actually apply them all the way through?
Yeah,
But it's a
and
touch
that's
point.
like maturity model type thing that we've been discussing as well, because obviously what we're kind of saying is if you haven't applied all the principles, you're kind of not doing GitOps. That's
Does
the
that
idea.
matter?
Well, it doesn't really, because you do you.
Right.
You know, in that sense, if you want to apply just half of them, yeah, sure, but in our eyes, that wouldn't be GitOps, that would be like on your way to become actually use GitOps. So, you know, there's a difference there as well, and you know, getting that type of information out is also something that we talk about. Because people are still putting stuff in Git and using pipelines and then calling it GitOps.
Yeah, you guys could write an opinionated post.
Yeah,
You're not doing it.
there's some of that, and that would be great to repost on the tag, like website, like you're saying, and you know, it might be something that we can think about across the different tags. The maturity, I guess, you know, Robert, probably all already been talking about this, but the maturity model that we wanted to also use for GitOps was something that other companies, like for example, WeWorks has already been doing with clients for like years and years. But they could use refinement too. And by the way, I'm not working for WeWorks anymore. But so this is not like a plug for them. It's just like, for example, like bringing the companies bring that experience. But the idea was to not just say like, are you doing GitOps or aren't you? It's more like for each, since it's principle led, that we can have a maturity kind of like scale, just for like sort of like self-assessment type of scale for on a per principle basis. And maybe something like that would be valuable in platforms too, because you said you want it to be principle led.
And I can imagine that being a right turn from where the paper currently is, a straw man currently, like kind of being completely thrown out for a different format. I think one of the characteristics of the current straw man that I like, which I hear you talk about here, the GitOps, is wanting to acknowledge and call out where you're not doing it. And I think that's one of the reasons why, while the maturity model makes me groan a little bit, being able to put a level 1 and describe the detracting effect of that behavior is actually really powerful, rather than only displaying, here's what good looks like. Because people can be like, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Right,
like,
we think you should do this, why should I do
Is
that?
it?
Yeah.
Or they think they're self-evaluating, like, yeah, I'm doing that. I'm storing it in Git. I'm running.
Right, I wanna have some debates with you all about
Like-
declarative and can I
Yeah.
have some imperative in there? So,
Explicitly calling out the behavior of it's stored in a repository, but is being applied by a pipeline on a schedule or not on a schedule, or on commit or not on commit, however behavior, and being able to acknowledge these are the pros and cons of that. These are the effects that occur in your organization if you do it this way, I think is powerful. Let organizations choose if that's good for them. Because for some, that's me like, that's exactly the behavior we want. Thank you. I'm gonna go on.
Definitely welcome those discussions.
Yeah, I think trade-offs,
Yeah.
like, definitely, like, economic data that way, right, is
Absolutely.
we should definitely do that, for sure.
For sure. And the only reason I brought it up now in this context is not to try to make that platform this, but to say, hey, we may be able to, I think the topic is really how can the tag help to unify things for the working group.
I love it. I mean, I'm
Right.
happy to give you a chance to talk about GitOps because I want to bring you guys into the fold and make sure that you feel comfortable here.
Well, but you have like 3 minutes left or something.
Yeah, so I got a little more, the last thing I want to mention around platforms, this is the area that I'm pretty passionate about, is the capabilities that we've identified, the 10 or 12 that are in there. I would love for us to go a level deeper in them and find synergies and find ways, mainly my motivation is to make it easier for users Like the ones that I've put up so far are the secrets one, which is service bindings. I feel like that's a difficult issue that's not a lot of money in it. And so it's, there's like 20 different ways to get a secret from the service to the actual workload so that it can connect back. And most of the time, somebody figured it out when they first set it up, and there's a bash script that manages it all. I don't even think about it, but it's worrisome. Like things are going to leak and a lot of different patterns. So I put that up there. Another couple that are up there, sustainability. We wanted to maybe talk about what that capability would look like in a platform. Came down to optimization, multi-tenancy. That the reason why that didn't make the paper is because we felt like platform users, that's not a capability they care about. Like they shouldn't even know they're a multi-tenant. But for platform builders, it's pretty relevant. So that's been a topic that we wanted to go further. Oh yeah,
We
Alex.
started the multi-tenancy white paper, yeah.
Yeah, but then we realized that, well, at least in my opinion, we realized we should describe the platform first, and then we can describe why you need multi-tenancy in the platform. So we're kind of at that stage there. Artifact storage, which we just talked about. Observability has its own work group. But portal that I put down to talk about this is another thing that's on my mind is breaking down portals into multiple capabilities. Yeah, I guess I'm just sharing these. If somebody's passionate about service bindings or is passionate about artifact storage, thank you, folks, or any of the domains that we've identified, and wants to bring together projects in that area, I think that's another thing that the working group could do.
And I think there are a lot of topics that come across several of the working groups and all projects. So in our open GitOps public meeting today, we talked a lot about secrets with GitOps. Because that's this one topic that we always come back to currently. And there's a lot of ways to do it, and how do you do that, and what are the benefits, or what are the pros and cons between all the different types of work.
A bunch of projects just came in to see, like external secrets operator, teller.
Yeah, there's about 1 million.
Yeah, and that's forgetting Vault, the elephant in the room.
Like a secret store and CSI, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm not going to go into that because we talked enough about that today.
There's some passionate folks at Red Hat that have been looking into stuff like this too.
So if, for instance, like the platforms working group, if we started to looking into secret handling and stuff like that, it would be a natural thing to have open GitHub so people come in to fill out like that perspective.
I would love there to be more talk around secret management, because it really is an important space, especially just in the GitHub area. How do you manage secrets?
I'm looking for my next project, maybe.
And it's huge in the different.
I mean, I use secrets in two camps. One, you're gonna encrypt it and store it within your Git repository. I'm like a sealed secrets. Or you use a Git, secret by reference. Something along the lines of external secrets, where I say some other operator, some other tool, bring it back.
But I
So in terms of spaces to do that in, we already are starting how under the GitOps working group, there's different teams to focus on different areas of things.
No, I didn't know that.
Oh, we just published, or not published, we just put up a markdown doc showing the teams and interested parties in those teams, so people can actually just open up a PR and say, I want to be in that team. Meaning I want to contribute to this, I want to talk with you about it, I want to add my ideas towards some kind of product, whether it's blog, white paper, whatever. Security, in the case of GitOps impact on environmental sustainability, it actually involves, projects like Kepler and Code. Basically lots of servers basically running and measuring energy and trying to understand the state of it now and what it could be if you use it in certain ways. So it's not just one product, it can be multiple products like that. And I feel like that relates to what you
should keep an eye on what you're doing there.
Yeah. And it
GitOps sometimes gets conflated with just app delivery general.
There's infra GitOps and other stuff as well.
But we it's probably worse because I'm in kind of all these camps at the same time. But at the same time, open GitOps, it's not really, communicating the things that one are doing, for instance, like the platform for example. You know, so we should be better at speaking.
It's
Yeah, a
just
little bit more
called
what we're
teams
doing.
markdown in the project.
Yeah.
Like
Uh,
it's GitHub open dash github.com
Yeah.
open dash GitOps / project. And then the teams.
But specifically, for instance, if the platforms working group wanted to start implementations when it comes to security.
Prototypes.
GitOps is one way, one tool that's very vital.
Prototypes, for sure, we're gonna have GitHub stuff in there.
So that should come very naturally that the GitOps people need to be involved when it comes to talking about security, because it's a big topic. for us.
And maybe like the different pieces of the outcome could land in different places. You know what I mean? Like something that's focused just on like the questions of people, how do I do GitOps with this? Okay, maybe that makes sense to really highlight, you know, in the Open GitOps project. Perhaps we bubble up also to the tag log, like
Mhm.
as Alex was saying. you know,
Gradually.
but something like that, you know, but if someone's looking at how to manage secrets generally for app delivery, GitOps can be just like one of the topics
Yep.
within
Yep.
the
Like in the Open GitOps, we need to deep dive into that. But that should then trickle into a grander
Mhm.
secret sharing and part of the
Yeah,
platform.
but let me, oh, you wanna go into show that?
Oh, I was just gonna show the Teams doc, just because that could be useful for,
Okay.
if you click down into project repo. And then just click Teams at the very bottom. That's all. It's super
Oh, nice.
simple. It's super simple and people can just, so it's like active, proposed and things like that.
And maybe we could share some of that between the working groups too.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. I want to keep us going here, so looking at the notes, so we covered platforms, we covered artifacts, covered GitOps. Jen, do you want to talk at all about operators?
Can I just be a quick thing? So, as you know, like we have the operator white paper, and it was an interesting story because we at that time like it lost momentum and it was like months without like anyone touching, and then we like picked up momentum. That's when I joined the tag and joined the operator working group. And interestingly, it's like it was one of those paths of like someone who had been in contact too much with like the CMCF, but I just started working with operators, and then I was like looking for information to literature about it or something to learn. And then I saw the meeting, I looked at the calendar and I saw operator working group meeting, and then I attended there. And then that's like, so then I was like full of energy, and then like working with Omar and Thomas and Alex then, and everyone who contributed like to get this white paper up there. And one of the things is just that, like, as Alex just said, like it became some like a point of reference. So today when I search, I see, you know, that the operator white paper there. So it's like really cool. But so one thing that we since the platform is now white paper and the like this think of like capabilities of platforms, it would be really nice to get a fresh version of the operator like white paper out there, and with opinions and perspectives, especially like matching like the platform capabilities, and also perhaps a definition and our like definition of operators. The thing is, yeah, last time one of the downsides was that it still was quite difficult to get contributors. Like some people attended the meetings, we tried to like distribute work, but it was ended up like sometimes was doing a lot of the work. So I would like to hear from you. We opened the Slack channel, which is tag app delivery work where operator white paper, basically all these words it's separated by dashes. If you have a story or like some something you would like to tell, like your opinion on the evolution of operators and how like how they are used today and how you use it today, that would be interesting, so we can get started. There are open, you can open pull requests to there is an open operator white paper V2
latest.
on,
yeah.
sorry,
It's that latest one that we
the
just showed.
latest, yeah, so yeah, this is the best, yeah, new ways,
Mm.
sorry. Yeah, so latest, and then you can contribute to there, but if you like, feel like, you know, you have a story and want to, we can discuss them on the working group, sorry, the tag meetings, or even, you know, like get some new content there to yeah, let us know on the chat, and yeah, we'd like to get this up going again and have the same like processes, getting a continuous update like the platform's white paper then. But it would be nice to have a new fresh look at the new implementations, and because the usage has changed quite a lot in the last 2 years, because that's being almost 2 years now that the white paper version 1 was released. So yeah.
I'll say, I think I mentioned this to you, Jen. I'm really interested in the different operators of operators, meaning operator lifecycle manager from the operator framework, or your cloud's chosen method for adding extensions to the platform. Like there are a plurality. There's a company called Plural that does this too. Actually, there's a bunch of options for getting an operator to your cluster. I mean, the operator itself may not even be operator framework operator. I'm not even saying that, but like it might be interesting to compare those and see if there's a standard way to create a catalog of, I mean, at least Kubernetes related operators.
That's Artifact Hub.
Artifact.
That's basically Artifact Hub. You just defined it. Artifact Hub.
You bring Artifact Hub into your cluster basically, and then you say, oh, I want to install this chart or this operator or whatever.
Well, no, you don't bring it
Not into your cluster, but like represented in your.
Would you bring it into the cluster?
I think I missed the question.
Yeah, I think.
I was right now like comparing like operator lifecycle manager, where I can go in and choose, I want these operators in my cluster, or I can go into Azure and I can say AZ, AKS, add Flux.
Okay, the
whatever
question
the thing
is there an API?
Is there a way to pursue some standard gallery and mechanism
Oh,
to
a
install?
gallery, yes,
capabilities?
but Artifact Hub is an aggregator for the various
Right.
sources that are meant to live elsewhere.
But I guess the idea is, does Artifact Hub currently expose an API through search what's in Artifact Hub? I know there's a UI, but is there an actual API?
I believe that there is, but I
I was
think that
still-
my life.
I mean,
on it
that
is
could be
pretty
something-
answered.
Maybe it's not.
Just to add,
You said you've used it before?
I've looked at the API.
just
So
to
that's
add,
So I mean, there's already prior art that's interested, already implemented something similar. If you're looking for like a self-managed that doesn't exist, but at least there is something out there in the community for you to leverage.
just to add a little bit to what Jen was saying, I started writing with V2 of the white paper. It's already available on the website, which does have a definition of what an operator is. I just sort of did that in the holiday period. I also recategorized all the existing operators with the kind of strengths of everything from, you know, the Python-based operators, you know, to QBuilder, operator framework, etc. But I think that the important thing to differentiate is the implementation of operators wholesale is extremely primitive, right? They're usually event-based to reconcile it. That's not really what an operator is. It should be a synthesis of human behaviors. And I think that this is an interesting concept, especially with local modeling, such as Llama, which you can apply into your models, which we've now seen with local ML AI. So I think the definition of operators is going to change dramatically in the next 12 months. You'll be side loading from a volume the behaviors of your operator, rather than writing a dumb bit of Go with a switch. And I think that's what we're inviting people to come and talk about and to sort of lend their thoughts to. And this harps back to this blog of, you know, what thought leadership would be valuable for the community. And I'm talking about using local domain specified LLMs. I bet a lot of people haven't even started looking at that yet, but there are people writing them, right? So there's some interesting stuff that we can really invite people to say, hey, you know, help us write the future of what operators look like. You know, I've also introduced things like Juju, which is not a very well-known operator pattern, but it is a pattern. And I think that the more widespread coverage we have of operators, the more it will show how disparate the landscape is. For me, I think what would be really interesting to take a page from the book of the platforms group is to define the kind of the heuristics of an operator, and what are the things that make it an operator, and to say, right, if you're close to this, then you've probably got an operator. And there's value in that, right? Companies value, they can say, right, we're aligning to this idea of what are the behaviors an operator can do, right? So yes, please do get involved. It's very fast moving subject.
Thank you.
One quick question. In terms of where the GitOps working group might help or come into play, I know the operator white paper has a big section on GitOps, but that was before the GitOps working group actually really, it was sort of larval at that time. It wasn't really totally formed. But if you're doing a new version of that, or since you're doing a new version of that, should we connect on that?
Of course, yeah. That'd be
Might-
really
I
valuable.
think I've said at some point that you don't write about GitOps without involving me or something. But that's
mean-
tagged somewhere.
Now that if you're saying you want to take the reconciliation concept out of operators, then it particularly, we would want to
Yeah.
bring it back in
Yeah.
around GitOps and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't have my head around that yet, but that,
Mhm.
at least if we're in contact, if we're all in contact about it, the two working groups.
Yep.
If it's via Robert, that's awesome, but one way or the other.
I
I
have
don't-
all of these. I don't know why I'm.
No, no. you can do it all.
Over communicating. All right, we're going nice and over everything. But we're done with the official stuff now. We just have a few lightning talks left. Me and Alex are signed up, but I think that we can prioritize ourselves lowest. Abhinav, I know wants to share Perilous. Yassine, is he here? Hi, okay, I don't recognize everybody. Was gonna talk about Microx, and Kartik was gonna talk about Spiffy and Spire. Not Spire, sorry, I just put them together in my head.
Very different. 50 big, a lot of this, fire is one implication.
Okay, good. So you'll tell us about that. I think that's relevant to our group. So, yeah, Abhinav's not in here. Who wants to go first? Or do we? I think we'll keep going, and if people need a break to go get coffee, we'll just go take a break. Like,
Can you share on Zoom or?
yeah, if you can share on Zoom, that would be best. And then I'll just bring yours.
I have a thing and.
Okay, we'll see you later, Robert. Let me,
Good job, everyone. Yeah, keeping up the pace. I heard it.
yeah, right. There we go. Who do I have? Oh, somebody joined in. That's not. Oh, Abhinav, did you want to go? Did you want to go first, Abhinav? We're just getting.
I can go, yeah, where's the, Zoom?
It's in the top of the Slack channel. It's the same Zoom,
Which section?
the tag app delivery channel. Get this out of the way. So
What's the password?
7777 5 sevens. Right. Somebody. All right, and then just share your screen and I will maximize it.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh, yes. Leanne showed me how before. There you go.
Cool. So thanks for Josh for giving me this opportunity. So I'm gonna
It's a
talk.
CNCF project, right?
Yep,
Yeah,
sandbox,
so-
yeah, it's a CNCF sandbox project. It's called Perilous. And the idea is to basically be able to give developers secure access into Kubernetes clusters, right? So I'll skip this. So when we talk about secure access to Kubernetes clusters, there was a survey that was done by Shadow Server. And it turns out 84% of Kubernetes clusters were accessible via the internet, meaning, there's definitely a security challenge that a lot of customers are still facing today, right? And when we look at a lot of the traditional approaches for security, typically, they try like a Bastion server, they try maybe like a VPN, but these are quite clunky solutions, right? Asking a security to open a port 22, the attack surface, since once you get into the Bastion, the entire private network is accessible. So these are not exactly, companies do it. They might even use like a jump host, for example. I'm going fast here, by the way, just from a timing point of view. Yeah. So, and VPNs, of course, are expensive to operate, right? So there's a question of like, when we're looking at the requirements, right? Firstly, how do we give developers access to Kubernetes clusters that may be living behind like a firewall, for example, right? And how do you make sure they get just-in-time access? So from a security point of view, they're able to log in, and when they're not using the cluster anymore, the privileges are taken away. It's a just-in-time thing, right? For zero trust. How do you make sure you give your platform teams and security teams kind of a centralized audit trail? So, because that's something they have to show a lot of time from a compliance point of view, from a IAM auditing and security point of view, right? So when we talk about Perilous, it's a open source project. It's by Rafe. Rafe is a Kubernetes operations company and management company. And some of the core capabilities that we have are basically, the ability to create custom roles for different developers, and the ability to fine tune that per project or on a per cluster basis, right? So for example, in a production cluster, maybe they have read-only access, but in a developer cluster, maybe they're able to, spin up a namespace, for example, right? And another challenge is integrating, your IDPs, for example, like if you have like a Okta or Azure AD, how do you map that to Kubernetes RBAC? That's been a historical challenge. RBAC is something that companies have had to deal with for a long, long time. So a part of the solution that comes with Perilous is the ability to take that IDP and map it to actual Kubernetes RBAC, and it'll show
IDP as an identity provider.
identity provider, not internal developer portals. Yeah. And then, yeah, we have like a GUI to be able to do this as well. And the way it works is, just to kind of talk a little bit about the design, is basically you can use kubectl, or you can use a browser-based kubectl shell that I'll show in the demo. And the Perilous server, that's something you install, but it doesn't require any inbound connections to your clusters. It's all that happens is you install the Perilous operator once you import your cluster into Perilous, and then it just has outbound 443. And the process is like when you log in as a developer or as a user, firstly, you're authenticated depending on your local user single sign-on, and like your RBAC, like, hey, like, do you have access to this cluster or not? And then what happens is if you have access, basically we create a service account just in time. And basically use the Kube APIs that able to respond using that service account. And once you close your kubectl access or you close your browser shell, we remove that service account as well. And we keep, of course, like an audit trail of all this activity. So I'll log into the demo here, right? So the way you start, I'm logged in as an admin, so you can create different projects, and in each project you can import a cluster. And the cluster import process is super simple. Like you can say, if it's coming from a public cloud like EKS, or like in my example, for example, I use DigitalOcean because it's cheaper. Or you can use like OpenShift, Rancher, anything else, right? So I'm not going to show the demo import or the cluster import process because that's something I already did. It's super simple though. You just import it and then you install the Perilous operator using a kubectl command.
Oh, so you have to go into that.
Yeah, because we don't want to inbound anything. It's only an outbound connection, right? And so then what happens is, so for example, here, what I'm going to do is map different users, and I have different groups, right? So imagine I have a developer group and an operations group, right? And so the developer group, they're only able to access certain projects, and they have only a namespace admin privileges, meaning they're only able to access certain namespaces that they're given, for example, by the platform team, right? Whereas the operations group, they have cluster admin privileges, so they're able to create namespaces, they're able to create other resources on the cluster. And what's cool is that it's all tied with Kubernetes RBAC. So we have all these different types of roles that you can use: cluster admin, project admin, namespace admin. So if I were to create a new user, or let's just take an existing user. If I wanted to assign the user to a project, I can assign different privileges, and I can do that on a per project basis. So again, like a prod cluster, they might only have a namespace read only, or a dev cluster, they might have cluster admin privileges. So you have that
create
flexibility.
role bindings and cluster.
Yeah,
bindings
right, yeah.
Depending on the.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And all that
You
is like mapped
synchronize it
in.
across your fleet.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all mapped in Parallels. And you can also give like certain like break glass access, for example, or if you need to like, you only want the kube config to last for a certain time. So they have to like refresh and download a new one. You can do that as well. So
I have a customer that literally was bugging me about the fact that Kubernetes admin credentials there's no like timeout or revocation.
Out of hours on call. That solves a lot of organizations' questions about that.
so
First on that, so admin credentials being, and where's the identity in that, right? We talk about identity. Because that's part of what
Mhm.
identity is supposed to solve, is it can't be indefinite.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, well, it's kind of cool that you're using a service account that you delete. That's a cool way to get an ephemeral.
So now,
idea.
yeah, exactly. So now I'm logged in as a developer, and the developer only has access to certain projects here, right? In this case, I'm just using the default one, and so I'm going to do a kube cuddle in this, and I'll show you like the differences, right? So and this is the admin view. So I'm just gonna. So as an admin, I'm able to do like a get NS, for example, like I'm able to list all the namespaces because I'm the admin, right? But as a developer, when we go back to their permissions, right? We said that for the default project, it's a namespace admin, and I only have access to a namespace called developer NS. So when I try to do that get NS command, it's going to fail because I don't have the ability to list all the namespaces. I only have the ability to list. Oh, there you go. Yeah, so yeah, I only have the ability to get like my namespace, right? So that's kind of like the the security that's being done here. And the audit, basically everything is audited. So if you go to the audit logs, you can see that developer Sally, try to do this command, try to execute this command. You could filter it by, last 1 month, last 24 hours, and you have the ability to export this as well from a security and audit and compliance point of view. And you can do this via like the commands that are being done, like API logs as well. Yeah, so like for example, if I'm developer Sally, I can also download my personalized kube config, and then use that as well. And the zero trust, the same thing will work. So like if you try to do a kube cuddle get NS, it won't work when you try to use that kube config, but because it's all like secured and accessing the API endpoint is actually the Parallels endpoint that it's referring to. So yeah, so that's pretty much most of the demo. Like, so we have documentation, where you can configure SSO, like, so you can do all of that as well with Okta. We have some demo videos there. We're going to be at the open source pavilion thingy.
Project
Yeah,
Pavilion?
Project Pavilion, sorry. So we're going to be there. We'll be there to answer questions, but yeah, just looking for feedback, looking for folks to try this out, as part of the platforms, as there's this whole concept of like, there's multi-tenancy, there's shared services platform. And so if you're using like a shared cluster, these kind of zero trust principles really come into play. So yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Pratik, do you want to go next? Did you sign on here? That seems fitting to the spiffy with this identity part. So
Could be just one piece of it.
yeah, so tell me more. I know when I started that service binding, when I opened the issue for it, Andy was like, think about spiffy here too, because you can give an identity for connecting services and that.
Correct, and if you step back and think about this, right, ultimately, everything that is being done between a pair of applications, services, workloads. And identity defines who's doing what. Something doesn't work, who did what at the point that it's wrong. Right? So there's an element of identity. And in the Kubernetes realm, you sort of, there's a lot of things that mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So I just introduce myself because I haven't been part of the tag actually very much. I was involved in the early days of Kubernetes, but since the early days of Kubernetes, was defining active and safe network, concept of network policy was actually part of the writing. Early days of service mesh, so authorization and Envoy was actually contributed by MIT into Envoy, early days of history as well. So we obviously evolved over since then, and this is not a product pitch, it's not a technology. We have an open source project pitch for that. This is to actually see some thinking and how we think about applications and how they connect with service. That
Yeah,
that's
perfect.
Right.
Thank you.
So so look, today when you deploy applications, put yourself in the shoes of a service owner. You've got a couple of deployments, a couple of clusters, and you have a bunch of service consumers across the network. It could be across other platforms. It doesn't have to be on your Kubernetes or multi Kubernetes. And you need to go figure out, okay, look, I need to have a service abstraction, let your few proxies catch up with all the nagging that happens going over it. You have an ingress abstraction, an ingress gateway, you have your gateways catch up. And when you talk about blue green, you talk about canary, you talk about other sort of constructs like that. Well, you need to have oftentimes the mesh. That's the pattern that people think about today. Doesn't have to be, but yes, that's what people think about. You have cloud infrastructure, load balancer, ELBs, NLBs, whatever load balancers, all of these need to catch up. And when you have a mesh data plane, that has to be programmed. So you need a mesh control plane. And each of these are running in disparate clusters. So all of these need to be federated. And put yourself in the shoes of a service owner that needs to actually figure out how all of these things work, because now you're managing state across all of that. And any one of those breaks, it's not just the initial deployment you ship and forget. Any one of those queue proxy doesn't sync correctly. Mesh proxy somewhere doesn't sync correctly. Like, hey, your application's not working. So that's the state we live in today. This is just Kubernetes.
This isn't identity specific, right?
This is not identity specific, right? So I'm segueing into where we're taking the thinking now. But that's the world today. And the reality is, I don't know if you guys agree, 90% of resources, time, cost is in all that other infrastructure. And in fairness to platforms like Cloud Foundry, I've actually been at Red Hat, OpenShift, a little bit of some. You have things like CF push that say, look, all of this can be abstracted away, but that infrastructure continues to exist. It's not just the fact that you're saying, as an application developer, we give you a little bit of a abstraction, but if things break, you need to go troubleshoot. Right? So that's the world we live in today. And the comparison I kind of draw is essentially what you're doing is you're wiring parts of the infrastructure. Proxies, gateways, client-side sidecars, load balancers. And that's not the way the phone system works today. You pick up the phone, and what do I do? If someone important, I take it. If not, send it to voicemail. If I don't recognize the number, maybe I take it, maybe I don't. Right? I decide what I do. But that's the kind of thinking you're trying to get people to start thinking about. And this is really a debate that we've been having in a number of organizations, which ultimately, if you step back and think about this, is there a way that we can define an abstraction, and specifically it's relevant to this group, because an abstraction needs to be around the service, maybe around the app. What is an app? In 2023 is a little bit different from 2015. It's different from when Solomon was talking about, hey, let's put everything in a container to be done with it. What's in the container? It might be a dynamic WebAssembly module being invoked in the network, right? So what is an app? That needs to be defined first. And secondly, what is that contract that app has with its consumers? And how do you define that? And in our view, that definition has to be linked to the consumer's identity.
everything comes back to what is the identity of the consumer, what group of identities. So you define a contract saying, when you have a consumer, what identity group does that consumer belong to? Is it someone that's authorized? Is it someone that has a service level objective? Is it someone that I need to ignore because right now I don't have capacity? All of those are defined by identities. But is there a way that we can define a wrapper at the application that provides these service contracts, that provides a way for the service owner to define these service contracts and not worry about the infrastructure at all? Yes, the infrastructure is always there. You need to get things from performing boundaries there. But how much of that infrastructure is not just, you can't ignore it, but how can you automate that infrastructure? So that when you have a service contract that says this identity is important and here's a service level objective, that entire intermediate infrastructure from the consumer to the service needs to follow that contract. Which, yeah, but
But right now, it does get, the request can get through, but you're saying you want to configure and allow different paths for that request?
not necessarily. What I'm saying is there needs to be a separation of concerns where the application owner does not have to go figure out how to make this happen across this disparate multi-platform complex infrastructure.
So they might just declare the golden path that they want, they don't want it to ever traverse Eastern Europe or something.
I have 3 deployments in 2 clusters. If I see a transaction from an identity group premium customer, make sure this SLO constraint is always begin, which means right now it goes to deployment in this particular OpenShift, this particular EKS cluster, this variable, right? So if you can get that separation of concerns, then maybe we can start thinking about letting the application owner not worry about the infrastructure. Until now, that has not been possible because we've been dealing with a world where, hey, if you need to do this, you need to go plumb the network, right? So some of the things we're starting to look at is capabilities that might be possible in newer technologies that enable some of this. And I've called out specifically HTTP because that's one area of focus for us in a few related organizations. And one thing that enables us, because now for the first time ever, identity is a first-class citizen in the actual transport of this. We all use HTTP. You may not realize it, but today HTTP is roughly, like in Europe, it's about 70% of traffic on the internet, right? So you probably look at the Zoom over H3 regularly. And the benefit of H3 is it's been defined to be entirely decoupled from infrastructure artifacts in the sense that everything about the transaction is independent of things like IP addresses. And if you look at the transport underneath, there's a lot of decoupling of infrastructure artifacts from what is the contract presented to the user. The second point I'll make here is in this world, in the H3 world, your X519 identity is now critical. Because in H3, there is no more HTTP. There is only HTTPS. TLS is now mandatory, which means every workload, at least every service that is running a HTTP service, needs to have an X509 certificate. Question now becomes, what is that identity to assign that certificate? Do you have a signed certificate, or do you have something that has trust associated with that? And this is when I've introduced technologies like Spiffy, because Spiffy provides a nice way of having a well-defined, it's a specification that says, when we assign you an identity, it has a syntax, right? You have a trust domain, you have other aspects of that Spiffy URI, such as namespaces, such as service accounts. And the other aspect of saying trust domain, it has to be rooted in some
hierarchy of trust. And so part of that is how do you establish that trust? Historically, especially if you look at app delivery, people go, I'm just going to use something like Cert Manager, create a certificate. But how do you trust that that certificate is what prevents you from creating a certificate request that says, I have this 50 ID from Howard, having it signed. And what prevents someone remotely from saying, I'm going to trust that. It has a 50 ID, so I'm going to trust it. You have to have trust all the way down. So increasingly with Spire, with the Spire has a CSI driver. Cert Manager has a CSI driver SPIFFE. So this is something that we take out of the hands of application developers. The workload comes up, there's a CSI driver for the cluster, gives you an identity that the platform owner has said, here is your SPIFFE ID. That identity is kind of, that certificate has a lifetime of 1 up, at least in Cert Manager. Spire is a little bit longer. Rotate it hourly, and something that the application owner should not have to worry about. So increasingly, the kinds of things we're trying to do in this layer is how do we take things away from the application owner? The application owner should not be doing a lot of this stuff. Mutual TLS is a attribute of that transaction. It's an attribute of that connection. The application owner should not have to go and define specific authentication policies. This is a question of what is connected to what on the wire, right? So that's the sort of, if you could call it a spiel, I don't know, it's just a sort of way of thinking about this. And I actually go back to the point you're making about, hey, we need to figure out multi-tenancy, we need to figure out secrets management. Yes, absolutely. But how can we decouple all of those from a developer having to think about that, right?
I like how you put that into multi-tenancy.
Exactly. And this is all an attribute of everything relies on identity. If you don't have identity, all of this, everything is like, as they say, turtles on the way down, right? So that's my spiel. We have an open source project that is doing just one part of it, which is mutual TLS, leveraging HTTP3. But that's again not the intent here. That's something we'll take a look at. But the basic thinking is when you start thinking about applications, if you don't have a attested identity, not just for the network communications, increasingly it's for things like code signing, it's for remote WebAssembly calls, it is for any number of things. And SPIFFE and where we brought it this far is just the first phase. It is essentially solving the last 5-6 years of how people deploy containerized workloads. Moving forward, the world is changing to where now you have dynamic instantiation of the application with WASI modules running on the network. You have you need a different identity when you're talking about an application where the inference engine has changed based on new data. And now your application behavior is different. So there's additional decomposition of identity that needs to happen as well. So these are all things to think about. And user identity, what would it what? Service identity, what service did what? Transaction identity, what happened in that particular transaction. All of those need to come together, be composed together. Decomposed because you have things like proxies, gateways, other things which are, when you don't use an API gateway, you are essentially delegating the identity to the gateway for your service, right? Saying, look, I'm giving you authorization to receive and log requests and send them. All of those need to be apart. I'd love questions. That's my spiel. Would love.
I mean,
what questions people have.
And my takeaway here is that like we're getting identity, a trusted identity into everything. We can leverage it for a lot more than we are.
Yep.
I hear you on the service binding stuff. That makes a lot of, like, the whole purpose of getting a secret over there is to prove your identity. If we have it built into the platform, then we can start leveraging that built-in identity to accomplish more.
Okay. Anyone else have any feedback, questions?
Yeah, thank you. One like identity, I feel like you gotta like wrap your head around it a few times before you totally get where all the pieces fall. All right, well, we have one more, last but not least, Yassine. Oh, there you go. Yes, we're making good time now.
Yeah, I think that's.
We guys need 5 minute breaks or we?
No.
we Move forward, all right. Okay. So I'm Yassine, I'm one of the co-founder of the project, which is named Microx. And Microx is an open source community native project, which is fully dedicated to API mocking and testing. And we really target and we try to do our best for real enterprise space. That's where we shine, let's say. And to make it clear, Microx is not only a tool by developer for developer, it's also I mean, we really aim to create a bridge between all the company owners and assets. By owners, I mean cloud owners, product owners, software architect, developers from the inside and the outside if you're working with partners and so on. That's all the community we like to collaborate with this tool. And by asset, what I mean is the fact that Microx today is able to cover and support more or less all kind of APIs. And why? Because we clearly think that a single API cannot fit all. And we have such a diversity of APIs, from traditional API to even driver system. Now due to the fact that we have a lot of customers and community users who are still using UML and have a huge patrimony of legacy system, they would like to modernize that using open standard or move to gRPC, GraphQL, or even driver system. And that's where we are helping them to see. And we are doing that with Microx, and universal approach in order to use them all. And of course, as we are community native, we can go anywhere, on a laptop, any cloud, on-prem. And if I'm drilling down a little bit on async now, I don't know if you heard about async API specification, but for the one who don't know, it's more or less like an open API, which is fully focused on web and HTTP API. Async API specification is fully dedicated to event-driven system and async protocol. And today within Microx, we are already supporting 6 of those protocols through Kafka, MQTT, WebSocket, RabbitMQ, NATS, and Google PubSub. And due to community request, we are working on SQS from AWS integration because we have a lot of interest. And now, if we are dealing about speeding up API and cloud native application, that's where Microx mocking comes into the game. Because if there's still a lot of people who think that contract and specification for API is only useful, generate your documentation automatically. We are doing much more than that. And we rely and we like to use example within the contract and specification. I mean, the real example, something which have a real meaning for the service we're going to provide. And we, by the way, we have contributed to async API spec. We have created the example within the spec. And Microx is able to import and digest all that stuff and generate mock in second without any code. It's very low code approach. And then we are creating all the requirements. We have provided a sandbox environment ready to use in 1 second. That's a big advantage. The first benefit is to be able to shorten the feedback. Because you can, as a provider, already have conversation with your consumers, your clients, your partners, and clearly immediately check if your implementation are going the right way. You can iterate, you can change some parameters and so on, and the huge amount of win regarding the time, especially at the enterprise scale. And second point is finally using this Microx approach, you are able to parallelize with development. This is especially true when today a single service is rely on thousands of microservices or maybe more. Now with this approach, you can work on and develop your own microservices and you don't need to wait for the others to deliver. The second point is more related to security, conformity, and quality insurance. And that's the testing part of Microx, because all the stuff that you have done with your contract, you can integrate Microx within your CI/CD pipeline. Doesn't matter the tool, we have plugins for plenty of like Jenkins, Spectre, fully automated all the testing stuff for each version. I mean, if you have multiple API versions, which is definitely gonna happen at certain point of time if you are successful, we can, from a single commit, check that you are not doing any breaking changes, you have not introduced any regression tests, and this in a fully automated way. And last but not least, I think it's always better from my point of view to have a testimonial from end user community and let's say listening from one of the maintenance folks. And this is something that we released a few weeks ago from a GDN company in the US, which is they are pretty well known in the US for transportation and logistics. And they clearly explain within this blog post why they are selecting Micros, where they are coming from, the them that we have been able to sell, and also the benefits. And there's a huge amount of benefits for one of the very critical business tools from a time to market and go-to-market point of view. So I strongly encourage you guys to just read this blog post because you are going to speak for yourself. And that's it for my talk. You said that it's a lightning talk, so I try to make it as light as possible, but I'm here to week. I'm very, very happy to have your feedback because we may be on the way to submit for joining as a sandbox project. So very, very happy to have your feedback.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing. Is there, like, how would you compare this to Pact? You know, which can generate mocks and tests.
Yeah, so we have a sort of different approach based on all of the APIs we are supporting. And we are an empathy consumer and maybe code first and on our side, we've been very optimistic at the beginning with very strong contract first approach. We also change our way and we have something that we name rated API on the space for people who like to code first, and then you generate the contract that you can re-inject within the system.
The Pact is more code first. Yeah, that's what I thought also.
Yeah, and we are more or less in the middle, but we are very focused on we think that in big enterprises with multiple teams and so on, having a contract first approach is a huge win.
Cool, thank you.
I'm interested in the approach where if I don't have access to somebody else's API, I have the real data, but I have the spec, right? The API spec. That's been a huge blocker.
It is, we have a lot of banks and some of them are using Micros in production, mainly with that, but they can really, through the example, reading the specification, publish some real data, something which are useful, I mean, for their application, but they from GDPR, from everyone, some they are not actually set up. So they can share their Micro sandbox to many users, including partners with other partners.
Is there a modernization play that you're seeing too at all? Like folks that are still stuck on SOAP, but want to allow developers to use, I don't know, mock that and convert it to REST or something.
Yeah, we have a lot of different users who are using these tools in order to migrate from SOAP UI to open API. But we also have some really nice use cases regarding people who like to go away from Runner and move to open API, and they automate all the testing phase and automate daily within Microsoft.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? All right, so I think it's 16:51. So if you want to stay with us for another 9 minutes, I'll stay. But I think we've maxed out the 4 hours we had. Thank you all for coming and sharing and discussing.
Yeah, thanks for organizing.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm thrilled to hang out with my fellow cloud citizens. So really well. We'll shut down the meeting.